Hey everyone, welcome back to Paranormal M. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I've also had a few people tell me these stories help them fall asleep, so feel free to share the video with anyone who has trouble sleeping. The first story tonight begins with a normal photo that seemed completely ordinary at first. Months later, the person looked at it again and noticed what appeared to be a face in the background. Not long after that, they woke up to a strange figure standing beside the bed. It never appeared that clearly again, but they continued seeing it during meditation and while relaxing. Sleep well, everyone. I was 18 when the main encounter happened. I'm 21 now, but I can still remember that night with uncomfortable clarity. The whole experience unfolded over several months, although I sometimes wonder whether whatever I encountered had been around much longer than that. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it yet. It began with a photograph. I'd taken a casual mirror picture after working out, mostly to track my progress. There was nothing unusual about it at the time. A couple of months later, I happened to look at the photo again, and that was when I noticed something in the background. Behind the bathroom door, close to the sink, there appeared to be a face peering toward the camera. I didn't remember seeing anyone there when I took the picture. Maybe I had overlooked some ordinary object or strange reflection, but once I saw the shape, I couldn't stop seeing it. It looked far too much like a face. That photograph unsettled me more than I'd like to admit. For weeks afterward, I struggled to sleep. Every small sound made me tense, and I constantly had the feeling that someone was watching me. Then, a few weeks later, the encounter happened. It was sometime after 2 in the morning. I had been deeply asleep when I suddenly snapped awake. There was no slow transition and no groggy confusion. It felt as though someone had flipped a switch inside my head. My eyes opened, and I could move immediately. At the foot of my bed stood a woman-shaped figure. She looked human at first glance, but only at first glance. Her skin had a pale blue glow, almost translucent, as though she wasn't completely part of the room. She had long hair, solid white eyes, and a wide smile filled with thin, sharp teeth. Instead of legs, her body tapered into something resembling a tail. The closest comparison I can make is a figure from an old storybook, something between a spirit and a sea creature. There was something graceful about her, but also something deeply predatory. She raised one hand and gave me a peace sign. Then she smiled. I was absolutely terrified. My whole body started shaking, and when she saw my reaction, she laughed softly. It didn't sound cruel exactly. It was more like she found my fear surprising or even amusing. I pulled the blanket toward my face and began praying. I avoided looking directly at her, but I could still see her standing there through the corner of my eye. She didn't rush toward me. She didn't threaten me. She simply remained beside the bed, calm and completely unbothered, until she gradually faded from view. After that night, she never appeared so clearly again. Still, whenever I meditated or closed my eyes while listening to music, I would sometimes see her in my mind. It was always the same image: the white eyes, the smile, and the peace sign. The final time I saw her was in a dream. She was standing in the same place at the foot of my bed, but this time she wore a dark crimson dress. She smiled at me for a moment and then disappeared. I remember searching the room for her. Somewhere behind me, a voice belonging to someone I trusted said, very calmly, "She's gone now." After that, I never saw her again. The feeling of her presence disappeared too. Looking back, I think the whole thing may have been too overwhelming for me at that age. Whether she was something supernatural, something created by my mind, or something I still don't understand, I wasn't ready for it. Maybe that's why the encounter stopped, There had been unusual experiences before her. Between the ages of 14 and 18, I frequently saw brief flashes of color, usually blue, gold, or white. I also dealt with persistent ringing in my ears, and occasionally, I would hear a voice just as I was drifting to sleep. Once, while half asleep, I saw the face of a blue-skinned man smiling at me. Another time, I sensed a tall, reddish figure wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed hat near my bed. I also had a handful of experiences that felt as though I had briefly left my body. After the encounter with the woman, I became fascinated with astral projection. I started practicing regularly, and that seemed to make everything more intense. While trying to project, unfamiliar faces would appear behind my closed eyes. One of them was a woman who repeatedly waved at me, almost as though she wanted me to follow her. Every time I felt myself getting close, excitement or fear would pull me back into my body. I also experienced powerful sensations moving along my lower spine. It felt like a current rising and falling through my back. Sometimes, while falling asleep, my entire body would begin vibrating so strongly that I would force myself awake just to make it stop. Eventually, work and everyday responsibilities took over. I stopped practicing and gradually lost interest in projection. These days, I still notice the occasional flash of blue, white, or silver light. The ringing hasn't completely disappeared either, but both happen far less often than they did when I was younger. Life feels quieter now, especially since I've been focused on building a career. Lately, though, I've considered returning to meditation. Part of me is curious about whether those experiences would return, or whether that chapter of my life has truly ended. That night changed me. It frightened me, but it also left me with a sense of wonder that I've never completely lost. I don't know exactly what I saw, and I'm not sure I ever will. But if it happened again now, I don't think I would hide beneath the blanket. I think I would look at her, raise my hand, and return the peace sign. Hey there. I want to share with you a story that's both chilling and deeply moving, about love, the trail, and the dark mysteries of a haunted village. So settle in and let me take you back to the early 1960s, to a small town where two teenagers, Carolyn and Reginald, met in high school. They were inseparable, truly each other's other half, the kind of young love that feels like it could conquer the world. But as their graduation caps flew into the sky, so did their paths. Carolyn dreamed of a quiet life in her hometown, while Reginald was drawn to adventure, eventually joining the U.S. Navy. Time and distance pulled them apart. After years of service, Reginald's life took many turns. He married once, but that chapter closed quickly, and eventually, he found himself working on the railroads in South Carolina, trying to settle down. Meanwhile, Carolyn's journey was far from easy. She married twice, both marriages ending in heartbreak. The second was almost fatal. Picture this. It's February 18th, 1987. Carolyn is at home with her 10-year-old daughter, Rhonda. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. When Carolyn opens the door, her second husband is there, but not for a visit. In a terrifying moment witnessed by Rhonda, he pulls out a gun and fires 6 bullets into Carolyn. The house is filled with the terrible sound of gunfire and Rhonda's frustrating gasps. After committing this horrific act, he flees and tragically takes his own life. Carolyn survives, but the bullets leave her with chronic pain and blindness in one eye. Years later, she's dealt another cruel blow. Liver cancer, traced back to hepatitis C, contracted from contaminated blood she received during emergency treatment. Despite all this, Carolyn, with her indomitable spirit, pushes forward. Fast forward to the year 2000. Carolyn, now working as a customer service rep for a television company, receives a surprising call. It's Reginald. Their connection reignites instantly, a spark that had never truly died. Within 6 months, they marry, and a year later, they decide to sell their home and retire together in Florida. Rhonda, though sad to see her mother go, feels hope bubble within her for the first time in years. But then, the darkness creeps back in. In July 2005, Carolyn stops answering Rhonda's calls. At first, Rhonda isn't too worried. After all, her mother and Reginald both had health issues. But as hours stretch into days, worry gnaws at her. On the third day, she drives to their Florida home. The front door is unlocked. Inside, their dog roams free. A plate with leftover food sits on the table, and crucial medications lie untouched in their bedroom. This is not like her mother at all. Alarmed, Rhonda reports them missing. The police launch an investigation, quickly tracing the couple's car, found abandoned on a deserted road, its battery missing. Then, an anonymous call comes in from a young couple claiming to be Carolyn and Reginald. But the police see through the ruse immediately. Following the trail, they discover a man in his early 20s using their credit cards. The trail leads to a rental car booked under the name Tiffany Cole. At a local motel, police find Tiffany, her boyfriend Michael, and a young accomplice, Alan. Their room is crammed with recently stolen goods, electronics, clothes, even perfumes. Among the seized items are the missing couple's keys and personal belongings. Under interrogation, Tiffany cracks, revealing a fourth accomplice, Nixon. Nixon's confession is harrowing. Tiffany and Michael had known Carolyn and Reginald since South Carolina. They'd taken Tiffany under their wing, like family, after a traumatic childhood. When Michael was kicked out of his home, Tiffany and Michael showed up at Carolyn and Reginald's door, penniless and homeless. Carolyn welcomed them with open arms, offering food and shelter. But greed took root when Tiffany overheard Carolyn mention the large sum they'd gained from selling their house. A month later, the group hatched a sinister plan. Alan and Nixon knocked on Carolyn's door, asking to use the phone due to a broken-down car. Carolyn, ever kind, let them in. But they quickly overpowered her, binding her and Reginald with duct tape so tightly that the only air came through their nostrils. Michael and Tiffany ransacked the house, stuffing valuables into bags. Then, they shoved Carolyn and Reginald into the trunk of their own car and drove to a remote spot where they dug a grave. I want you to imagine the horror of that moment. Carolyn and Reginald, exhausted and scared, clinging to each other in that dark pit. The assailants began filling the grave with dirt and mud as the couple gasped for air. The cruel tormentors even forced mud into their mouths and noses to choke them, yet the couple's faint gasps continued beneath the earth. Nixon's confession broke the officers' hearts, tears flowing as the full nightmare unfolded. He was sentenced to life in prison, while Tiffany, Michael, and Alan faced the death penalty. Now, hold that thought as we shift to another story, set decades later in 2010. Dane, a passionate wildlife photographer, his wife Kate, and their spirited 10-year-old daughter Nancy embark on a vacation to a small village called Mayong in Assam, India. Originally planning elsewhere, they changed their destination under Nancy's insistence. Mayong is a place of lush greenery, rich wildlife, and deep culture. But it's also shrouded in eerie legends of dark magic, witchcraft, and disappearances. The village's history is steeped in tales of black magic, with practitioners known as Oja who have ghostly assistants. Some say human sacrifices to goddess Shakti are still performed here. It's a place where the line between reality and dark folklore blurs. After a tiring journey, the family settles into their resort. Early next morning, Dane sets out alone into the forest to capture the beauty of the flora and fauna. But the resort manager rushes to stop him, warning, "Sir, the things inside these woods are deadlier than any animal." Dane laughs it off, confident in his skills, but the words linger uneasily. That day, The family visits the Pobatora Wildlife Sanctuary. Nancy's eyes light up at the sight of the majestic one-horned rhinos. As dusk falls, they return to their room. Kate and Dane sit by the window, the moonlight casting silver shadows over the forest. As they lean in for a tender moment, Kate's gaze freezes on the tree line about 100 meters away. She sees two naked women, their faces wearing eerie, emotionless smiles. One gestures strangely, first to a baby, then mimicking cutting off its head. Then, just like that, they vanish. Kate is pale, trembling, and Dane, seeing her fear, looks through his camera to confirm what she's seeing. Kate breaks down in tears, confiding that the women showed her visions of their daughter suffering. The night stretches on, filled with restless tossing and sleeplessness. At dawn, Kate begs Dane to cut the trip short. Tickets are sold out, and they're forced to stay one more day, a day that will haunt them forever. They tell Nancy not to leave the room, but exhaustion overcomes them. At 4 p.m., Dane wakes to find the door open and Nancy missing. The door slams shut, trapped by some unseen force. Kate awakens, spotting Nancy walking in a trance toward the forest, drawn by the same naked women. Kate's heart shatters as she watches her daughter vanish into the trees. In a desperate bid, Kate jumps from the window, blood dripping from cuts caused by broken glass, and races after Nancy into the dense forest. She calls out, but Nancy seems distant, almost unreachable. Then, a chilling moment. Nancy's voice calls for help, yet when Kate pursues, she realizes it's a cruel illusion, leading her toward a cliff's edge. Suddenly, a hand grabs Kate's shoulder, trying to push her over. She screams, and Dane arrives just in time, pulling her back to safety. They try to open the locked door, but it won't budge. Frightened and desperate, they seek police help. But even with canine units, Nancy's trail runs cold as night falls. That night, Dane notices birds fleeing the forest, smoke rising in the distance. Trusting his instincts, he and Kate rush toward the source, only to be met by the pounding beat of drums and hear their daughter's screams. They find Nancy tied to an altar, the naked women from Kate's visions surrounding her. One blood-smeared woman carves strange symbols into Nancy's skin, pulling out her hair one strand at a time. Kate rushes forward, but the women overpower and bind her and Dane to nearby trees. The horrifying scene unfolds. The women drink Nancy's blood, force Kate and Dane to ingest it against their will, and revel in their terror. As the blood-smeared woman raises her knife to end Nancy's life, Dane cries out in desperation. Then, a gunshot rings out. The woman falls, lifeless, as the others flee into the night. Exhausted and shaken, Dane and Kate collapse, finally reunited with their daughter, saved from the darkness. At least for now. These stories remind us of the fragile line between hope and despair, love and betrayal, and the unseen shadows that linger just beyond the light. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones rooted in truth. Hey, I just wanted to share some stories from my life. Nothing wildly exciting maybe, but I hope they resonate with someone out there. Weird things have always seemed to orbit around my home, but nothing quite as sinister as this particular memory, aside from one other time. I actually have a couple more stories tied to this strange thread, so if you're interested, I'll share those too. Kind of like a little series, right? If you're up for it. So this one happened when I was in middle school. My brother, let's call him Dane instead of his real name, he had this drum set in his room upstairs. For years, really. It wasn't unusual to hear him pounding away from blocks away sometimes. The drums just carried through the neighborhood like thunder. I remember the day clearly. I'd just gotten off the bus, walking home with my earphones in, but even through the music in my ears, I could hear the steady rhythm of those drums echoing before I even reached the house. I went through my usual routine. unlocking the door, stepping inside, sinking into the couch, and letting the music wash over me to unwind. About 15 to 20 minutes in, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad asking what Dane and I wanted for dinner. Dad usually worked late, so it was normal for us to be alone for a while. I pulled out my headphones and decided to check on Dane upstairs. The drums were still beating loudly as I climbed the stairs, the sound wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I pushed open his door, expecting to see him sitting there, sticks in hand. But the moment the door creaked, everything stopped. It was so sudden, like the silence swallowed the room whole. I glanced down at my phone, about to call out, but when I looked up, the room was empty. No Dane, no music, nothing. My heart started to quicken. I stepped further inside, scanning for any sign. Maybe the TV was on, or the radio Dane kept next to his bed. Both were silent. I edged toward the back of the room where the drums sat. Standing behind them, I checked the drumsticks pouch and saw they were still tucked safely inside. Then, an icy wave of dread washed over me. It was like a shadow had dropped over the entire room, heavy and oppressive. The best way I can describe it is this looming darkness pressing down on me, as if something unseen wanted to reach out and harm me. I was frozen for a moment, then adrenaline kicked in. I bolted. Across the room, down the stairs, and back onto the couch as fast as I could. Alone, confused, terrified. That kind of dread? I've only felt it a handful of times in my life. I didn't tell anyone what happened for months. I was scared no one would believe me. It wasn't until something else happened with those drums that I finally said something. And this time, someone else saw it too. Now, another story, from a few years ago when I was living in this really isolated desert town in Nevada. Picture this. Behind my parents' house, there's this massive field, maybe 4 square miles, surrounded on 3 sides by huge salt cedar trees that form this thick, natural barrier. There are only a few small breaks where a person could slip through. The 4th side is just a dirt path lined with power lines. Sometimes you'd see a car or an ATV pass by, but mostly it was quiet. I used to walk that path a lot, sometimes alone, sometimes with my dog, a big German Shepherd. One day, I was almost finished with my walk, heading back toward the house. The clearing was to my right, and the world was quiet except for the usual, the wind rustling, the crunch of dirt and gravel beneath my boots, and the gentle jingling of my dog's collar. Then, everything just stopped. The wind died completely. Even the sound of my footsteps vanished, like the air itself had frozen. The silence hit me hard. It was deafening. I could feel a ringing building in my ears, sharp and intrusive. I turned my gaze to the right, across that vast clearing. And there it was, an enormous silver cigar-shaped object resting on the ground. At first, my mind scrambled for logical explanations. A weather balloon? A downed aircraft? Nothing fit. The longer I stared, the brighter it glowed, like light shining from inside it. So bright that my eyes started to hurt, and I had to look away. In the blink of an eye, when I looked back, it was gone. Just like that. The sounds flooded back, the jingling of my dog's collar, the breeze whispering again. The ringing in my ears faded. But then, a suffocating fear settled over me. A feeling that I'd glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see. Worse, that whatever it was, it saw me too. I didn't hesitate. I ran back to the house as fast as I could. That was my very first real encounter with something unexplainable. Since then, I've had a few more experiences, and every single one brings that same chilling feeling. Not just that I see them, but that they see me. So yeah, that's my story. I hope it didn't freak you out too much. Have you ever felt that kind of presence? Like the air itself holds its breath. Like you're caught in a moment that's bigger than you, and the world is watching. It's unsettling, but also, strangely, it makes you feel alive in a way nothing else does. You know, sometimes life throws these moments at you that just stop you in your tracks. Moments that feel like a quiet whisper from the universe. I want to tell you about one such moment I had, about a dream that visited me on the anniversary of someone very special's passing. It's a story wrapped in warmth, memories, and a little bit of mystery. So, about a year ago, I moved to Paris. Now, if you've ever known someone living there, you understand right away how unbelievably tough it is to find a place to live. I wasn't picky at all. I was in my mid-20s with a decent job, a good salary, and all I wanted was a tiny studio apartment, nothing fancy. But no matter how many places I tried for, I kept getting turned down. There were so many reasons. Landlords didn't want someone new in town, or they said it was because I was still on probation at work, which, by the way, is totally normal here in France. Others were just prejudiced because I'm from Eastern Europe. It was heartbreaking. I was basically homeless, crashing on couches at the homes of some wonderful people I'd just met. I had been rejected from around 20 flats by then. There was one last apartment to see, a place that was actually nicer than the others I'd looked at. But honestly, by that point, I had zero hope it would work out. I was exhausted, stressed, and feeling so down. My mom was worried sick, and it had been almost 2 months since I'd moved. It was an awful time, not just for me, but for my family too. Even though my company was paying agencies to help me, and I had a good salary, nothing seemed to be going right. Now, I want to tell you about Anna. She's been part of my life for as long as I can remember. Actually, she was my mom's best friend, like a second mom to me. Anna helped my mom get away from my abusive dad when I was little. She looked after me often and was always so incredibly supportive. She had this beautiful way of making you feel like you could conquer the world, always telling me I was amazing and that great things were ahead. She was warm and caring in a way that felt real, and I always felt lucky to have her in my corner. As I grew up, I moved away to another city in my home country, and sadly, Anna got sick. She was diagnosed with cancer. It was so hard on my mom, because Anna had always been this incredibly healthy person, eating well, staying active, but she had smoked when she was younger, and unfortunately, that caught up with her. I didn't get to see her again before she passed, and I couldn't attend her funeral because I was far away and had exams. Our lives had drifted apart over the years. Back to Paris. One night, I fell asleep utterly drained, and I had the most vivid dream. I found myself talking with Anna. She was there, looking just like I remembered, that warm smile on her face. We talked about my mom, about how I was doing. And then she told me how proud she was of me. Proud that I was chasing my dreams, building a career in Paris, working hard, and making a life for myself. She said she was with me, always, and she believed I was going to live a wonderful life. When I woke up, my heart was full and strangely comforted. I called my mom right away to tell her about the dream, how beautiful and uplifting it was. There was a pause on her end, a quiet moment that felt heavy. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Do you know today is the anniversary of Anna's death? I didn't know. There was no way I could have known. I hadn't been at the funeral, and it had been years. How could I have remembered the date? I just didn't. And suddenly tears welled up, spilling down my cheeks as I felt this deep, unexplainable connection. My mom was quiet too, her voice thick with emotion. A few days after that, something unbelievable happened. I got the apartment. the one that had felt impossible to get. It was bigger, newer, nicer than any place I'd seen before, and yet it had been a no from every landlord so far. I really believe Anna helped me somehow. Ever since then, I've felt like I have a guardian angel watching over me. Right now, I'm back home, on holiday in my hometown. I decided to visit Anna's grave, to light a candle for her, as we do in my culture to honor those who have passed. It feels like a small way to say thank you, to keep her memory alive, and to acknowledge that even in her absence, Anna's warmth still surrounds me. And honestly, that means the world. Hey, I want to share something pretty personal and a bit unsettling that happened at my dad's house out in Missouri. It's a story about two strange encounters that really shook me up, and I hope by telling it, you'll feel like I'm right there with you, living through it all again. So, a little background first. I grew up as a hardcore atheist, the kind who didn't believe in anything supernatural or paranormal. Even the idea of alien life zooming around at light speed felt totally unrealistic to me. And God? Well, if he existed, I thought, he didn't exactly come across as a moral being in the scriptures I'd read. But around 2017, something shifted. I started to question my absolute disbelief and became more agnostic. I wasn't saying I believed in all this stuff, but I was open to the possibility. And honestly, after what I experienced, I don't think I'll ever go back to that place of certainty again. My dad lives out on Highway 44, between St. James and Cuba, Missouri. The house sits kind of isolated, with neighbors about a quarter-mile down the road on one side, an open field on the other, woods stretching behind the property, and a road with more woods across from the house. It's quiet, wide open, and peaceful most of the time. The first moment I felt something was off was back in 2018. It was late at night, around 10 p.m., and me, my dad, and my brother were out at the pole barn working on my dad's truck. We usually keep a firearm nearby when we're outside, just for safety. I stepped out to have a cigarette, and right away, this heavy feeling came over me. Like someone was watching, really watching me, like I was the bullseye of a sniper's scope. It was an intense, chilling sensation, and I couldn't shake it. Now, my dad and brother didn't feel anything unusual, but I told them about it. My dad said if I felt so uneasy, I should shoot a few slugs into the woods behind the house, the woods where I felt the presence was coming from. And that's exactly what I did. I fired 3 slugs into the dark tree line, but nothing stirred. No sounds, no movement, just that oppressive feeling lingering for another 10 minutes or so. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination running wild in the quiet night, but it stayed with me. Fast forward nearly a year to July 2019. I was back at my dad's place, and he told me about this strange sound he'd been hearing, almost like a heartbeat coming from the floor of the house. It was so faint you could only hear it if everything else was dead silent and your ear was right on the floor. The sound was steady and constant, lasting through the days and months. Every time I checked in, he'd say, "Yeah, it's still there." It was eerie, but it didn't make me feel unsafe, just odd. Then came September 2019, and that's when one of the scariest things in my life happened. I was there for a weekend, and my dad, brother, their dog, and my cousin all went to town, leaving me alone at the house. Instead of crashing on the couch, I chose to sleep in my dad's room. It was a big, king-sized memory foam mattress, really comfortable. I must have been exhausted because I fell asleep around 8 or 9 in the morning. I don't know how long I was out, but suddenly, I felt the bed shift slightly. At first, I thought the dog had jumped up, but I was so tired I didn't even open my eyes. Then, out of nowhere, the bed violently slammed up and down. It went on for what felt like 10 to 30 seconds, each slam shaking the whole mattress. I was frozen, paralyzed with fear, completely able to move or even scream. The only sounds were the bed crashing and the box fan rattling against the floor. When it finally stopped, I slowly opened my eyes and looked around. The closet near the door was closed. The door was cracked open, a normal sight. But I was terrified to move. I just sat there for what felt like 20 to 40 minutes, hoping nothing was lurking in that closet. Eventually, I grabbed the shotgun sitting by the bed and carefully opened the closet. It was empty. I checked the whole house. Windows were closed with screens intact, doors bolted and locked. I even looked online to see if there had been an earthquake, but nothing was reported. I told myself maybe I had a seizure, something I'd experienced in my youth, but even that didn't fully explain it because that box fan had been pushed about 5 feet across the floor, tipped over. 2 hours later, when my family returned, I didn't say a word. I forced myself to believe it was a hallucination or a seizure. Then, 2 years later in 2021, the strange things really started piling up. My brother had moved out, so only my dad and I noticed these things. When I arrived one Friday night, my dad said, "I'm not on drugs, but I need you to tell me if I'm losing it." We went to his room, turned off the lights, and what I saw blew me away. There was this silhouette, a humanoid figure, walking between 2 trees in the backyard. It left these ghostly after images, like tracers, as it moved from one spot to the other. Then, suddenly, it would vanish and instantly reappear back at the starting point, repeating the same path over and over. It was the same pattern in my brother's old room. The figure seemed to disappear and reappear behind different trees, almost like it was playing some eerie game. I thought maybe we were both seeing things, feeding off each other's imaginations. But then, I noticed a flickering light deep in the woods, a yellow-orange glow flashing 3 times in quick succession, fading slowly. My dad hadn't seen it, but when I told him, his fear was palpable. He said he'd seen similar lights before, right in those woods. That night, we covered the windows with blackout sheets and kept a firearm by the bed. Over the next few days, I kept hearing heavy stomping noises in the attic late at night, once or twice each night, enough to make my skin crawl. We were too scared to investigate, so we just tried to ignore it. I even saw rusted metal near the house, glowing an eerie green in the dark, which was downright creepy. I kept trying to rationalize the shadows and lights. Maybe the moon and clouds were casting strange shapes. But it was a new moon, and the sky was mostly clear. Maybe animals flying past the porch lights? But the silhouettes were so solid and dark, it didn't feel like a bird or bat could create that effect. I'm 26 now, with perfect eyesight, and I don't scare easily or believe in the supernatural. But this stuff made me question everything. My dad's experiences are even stranger. He's reported seeing translucent humanoids, a robot-like figure covered in flesh, strange lights that don't look like any vehicle, shadowy black figures, even a white misty one. He's seen a giant black cougar and heard voices calling, "Help," and "Hello," from the woods. There have been tapping sounds on windows at odd hours, screeches unlike anything he's heard, and howls reminiscent of some creature you'd expect to find in a horror show. Sometimes his vehicle won't start in the morning, and other family members have noticed this too. One spring in 2022, he was out near the tree line foraging when his pit bull, a big, loyal dog, was suddenly kicked into a tree, yelping in pain. Dad swears he didn't hurt the dog, and the dog never showed anything but love for him afterward, though it wouldn't stray into the woods anymore. Our family thought maybe Dad accidentally hurt the dog, but knowing him, he'd have shot it if it was a threat. This dog is his only companion now, and they rely on each other. That same winter, around January or February, Dad heard knocking on his window around 5 or 6 a.m. Thinking someone was trying to break in, he grabbed his shotgun and the dog and went outside. While checking the side of the house, He says he was suddenly thrown backwards about 5 or 6 feet, spraining his hands. His hands swelled up so badly he struggled to lift even a glass of water. The next day, the gun was right where he fell, and his footprints were the only ones in the snow. No sign of whoever or whatever pushed him. While hunting in the bitter cold, sitting in his tree stand, Dad heard crunching snow nearby but saw no tracks or animals around. He was frozen with fear because he swears he saw something that looked just like the predator from the movies. Some nights, the woods light up even though there's no moon at all. Motion sensor floodlights flicker on and off for no reason, sometimes staying on for hours. And just this past October 2nd, 2022, he saw what looked like Bigfoot. While walking a trail in the backyard with his AKM rifle, he heard jingling like a collar, but the dog was inside. An odd, haunting melody filled the air. Then he saw it, an enormous creature, about 8 feet tall, 450 pounds, covered in long black hair, walking toward him, only 15 to 20 feet away. Dad backed up slowly, firing 25 rounds at its chest, but the bullets passed right through it like it was a hologram. The creature made no sound and stopped at the tree line without running. He brought my grandmother to look, and though she's 84 and has poor eyesight, she saw a tall black shadow standing there too. Dad was so scared he can't even remember what its face looked like. There are more stories, but these are the ones I remember best. Even the neighbors have experienced weird things. Cattle mutilations with precise cuts, chickens killed and arranged in circles in locked coops, and sightings of huge winged creatures with 15 to 20-foot wingspans. Folks around here are quiet about it because no one wants to sound crazy. I don't know what to make of all this. I don't believe in coincidences, but these events are so strange it's hard to wrap my head around them. I'm honestly scared to go down there now, even with a gun. We tried putting up deer cameras, but they stopped working, even with new power sources. If anyone has ideas on how to capture evidence without internet or fancy gear, I'm all ears. Writing all this down makes me feel a little crazy, but maybe sharing it will help me make sense of it. I get why Dad keeps quiet about it now. Talking about shadow people, a predator-like figure, my bed shaking violently, Bigfoot, and strange lights sounds like a bad movie script, but it's all real. All of it. Thanks for listening. Hey there. I want to share with you 3 of the strangest experiences I've ever had. Each one stuck with me for different reasons, and they all left me questioning what's real and what's not. So buckle up, because these stories are a bit of a wild ride. Also, a quick heads up, the first story involves panic attacks, so if that's something sensitive for you, please take care as you listen. Alright, let's start with the most recent one. This happened a couple of summers ago during a Midsummer's Eve celebration with my boyfriend, his family, and their neighbors. We were outside, enjoying the warm evening, laughter floating in the air, the smell of grilled food, and the gentle hum of conversation blending with distant music. But I wasn't quite myself. You see, a few days earlier, something had happened that shook me deeply. I was dealing with PTSD without fully realizing it. I hadn't planned to join the celebration, but I ended up traveling to his place the night before because I knew it would feel safe there. Everyone knew a bit about what had happened, but didn't really grasp how much it weighed on me inside. Honestly, I didn't even fully understand it myself. As the party went on, people started asking questions about what had happened. Their voices were curious but heavy, and I could feel panic bubbling up inside me like a storm ready to burst. I tried to keep it together, but it was no use. I excused myself and rushed inside the house, away from the garden where everyone was. Once inside, I collapsed onto the cool wooden floor. My breath came fast and shallow, my hands trembled uncontrollably, and I felt completely overwhelmed. It was the classic panic attack, the kind you wish no one ever has to endure. Then, from behind me, I heard a calm, gentle voice say, "It's all right, Nim. It's going to be okay. You're okay, Nim." It was soothing, like a warm blanket wrapped around my shaking heart. But here's the thing. I hate being seen like that, so I scrambled to my feet and moved further inside to be alone. Slowly, I began to calm down and eventually sat on the sofa. My boyfriend came in shortly after, his face lined with concern. He told me the guests had left, and I admitted I wished no one had seen me like that. He said he hadn't noticed at first and thought I'd just gone to get something. Then I told him about the voice behind me, that comforting presence I'd heard. He stared at me for a moment, his brow furrowed, before saying quietly, "Nim, we were all still outside. No one followed you in. You were alone." I felt my blood drain from my face. It sounds like something from a movie, but I truly felt it. I realized then I couldn't place the voice I'd heard. It sounded familiar, but not like anyone I knew. You know, when panic attacks hit me, it's like my mind splits into two parts. One overwhelmed by the panic, and the other quietly watching over me, trying to help me breathe, steady my footing. Usually it's the same consciousness experiencing both, but this time, the second part actually spoke to the first. And in my terrified state, I didn't realize it was my own voice reaching out to comfort me. It's a bit eerie, but also strangely comforting to know that even in my darkest moments, some part of me is looking out for me. Okay, on to the second story, which happened about 5 or 6 years ago when I was around 22. I was out walking my family's old dog through a fairly busy part of the city. The evening was quiet, and I was just enjoying the walk when, suddenly, I saw a flash of light above us. At first, I thought maybe someone in an apartment had switched on a really bright lamp, so I glanced up. The sky, which had been pitch black moments before, suddenly lit up like it was daytime. It was this brilliant blue, almost electric, and a streak of light flashed across it like lightning. It was so fast and surreal, like the universe had glitched for a moment. I blinked, and just as quickly, everything returned to darkness. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what I'd seen. Had I imagined it? My dog seemed a bit uneasy, maybe sensing my confusion. I shrugged it off, thinking I was just tired and needed rest. But sleep didn't come easily, and a small part of me was unsettled. So I turned to the internet for answers. Turns out, lots of people in my city and nearby areas had seen the same thing that night. Some even heard explosions. After digging around, I found an article where a scientist explained that what we witnessed was a bolide, an exceptionally bright meteor that lit up the sky almost like the sun. The flashes I saw were probably the meteor's tail as it passed overhead, and the sudden daylight was its intense brightness momentarily illuminating everything. That explanation made sense and grounded the experience in reality, though it still felt otherworldly in the moment. Finally, the last story is the oldest and maybe the most mysterious. This happened when I was around 12 years old, during a family trip to our holiday home. It was a bright, warm afternoon, the kind of day where everything feels calm and safe. We were almost home, walking past the last yard before ours, when something made me stop in my tracks. I looked into the neighbor's yard and froze. There stood a figure, tall, upright, roughly the size of an average man. He wore ragged clothes, or maybe they were just very tattered. His hair was unforgettable, long strands that reminded me of tentacles, almost like the alien from those Predator movies, but maybe just dreadlocks. His face was the strangest part. His skin was a solid gray, not pale or sickly, but like concrete or ash. Deep wrinkles carved into his face distorted his features, almost hiding his eyes. It was unsettling, like looking at something not quite human. We stared at each other for a few moments. I was shocked, and honestly, he looked just as surprised to see me. Then, as if snapping out of a daze, he hurried away behind the house. I quickly caught up to my parents, still shaken. But it didn't end there. Later that evening, just as the sun was setting, I stepped outside again and felt that same freeze come over me. There he was, in the neighbor's yard once more, about the same distance away. This time, his expression was stern and puzzled. We locked eyes again, silently communicating something I can't quite explain. After a while, he turned and disappeared behind the house once more. I don't remember what I did after or how I felt exactly, but I told my parents, and they said I seemed pretty shaken up. Over the years, I've been back to that place many times, but never saw him again. No one else ever mentioned seeing anything like that either. Could it have been my imagination? I've always been a storyteller, but even at that age, I could tell the difference between what was real and what wasn't. Could it have been sunstroke? Possible, but I've had severe sunstroke before without hallucinations like that. Maybe it was a man in a mask or face paint, but the area was busy and no one else seemed to notice. So I'm left wondering if it was something paranormal. And strangely, I'm not afraid of him. There was no malice in his gaze, just a kind of mutual understanding that we would leave each other be. Whatever it was, it reminds me that even in a world that feels so mapped out and known, there are still mysteries waiting just around the corner. Maybe, in some way, I'm part of someone else's mystery too. Thanks for listening to these stories. I hope they gave you a little chill, some wonder, and maybe a reminder that not everything can be explained. And that's okay. Hey, I want to share something really strange from my childhood, an experience that stayed with me all these years, making me question reality itself. I was about 7 or 8 years old, living in this tiny village where everyone knew each other. It was one of those places where the river was the heart of daily life. Everyone gathered there to wash clothes, dishes, and just share moments. My mom went there every day to do laundry, and I usually tagged along. One particular day, just like any other, I was there with my mom. There were kids around, and I was chatting with a girl and a boy my age. I boasted about how I could jump into the river, even though I couldn't actually swim. They didn't know that, so without hesitation, I took the plunge. I jumped in, and suddenly I was underwater. I remember this overwhelming confusion. Why was no one trying to help me? I couldn't even scream. The water was so unfamiliar, so cold, and it swallowed me whole in silence. Time blurred. I don't know how long I was underwater, but I'm certain it wasn't hours, or I wouldn't be here to tell you this. Then, out of nowhere, I found myself walking down the village street, completely dry. My clothes weren't wet at all. I don't remember how I got out of the river or who helped me. It was as if the whole episode was swallowed by a fog in my mind. The only clear memory I have is a boy from the village gently touching my shoulder and telling me that my mom was calling me. That moment snapped me back to reality, fully conscious. But the path from drowning to walking was a complete blank. What baffles me most is that if someone had saved me, everyone would have known. But no one did. Sometimes I wonder if it was a dream, but it never felt like one. It felt real because I remember the jump, the moment before I hit the water. My mind tries to dismiss it as a trick, but deep down, I know it was real. And I always come back to that moment with a quiet, persistent question. What really happened that day? Now, switching gears, I want to tell you about a haunting experience someone shared with me recently. My friend Emma, she's 25, and she moved into this lovely new apartment with her fiancé. Everything seemed perfect, but strange things started happening when she was home alone. It was late one morning. Her fiancé had already left for work, and as Emma was waking up, she heard the door to his office creak open. She checked his location on her phone. He was nowhere near home. Then she heard soft footsteps padding on the carpet and the guest bathroom door creaked open. Her heart racing, she grabbed a pocket knife and locked herself in the closet that shared a wall with the bathroom. She called her fiancé, and while on the phone, she thought she heard a faint, muffled voice, a woman whispering, "Hey, hey," almost soothing but utterly eerie. More shuffling noises followed. Then her fiancé arrived home. He searched the entire apartment but found nothing unusual except his office door left open and a childhood photo of himself overturned in the living room. Emma tried to convince herself it was paranoia, but the next few nights were no better. She had nightmares of the same voice whispering, "He's coming," as someone pounded on her bedroom door. This went on for 3 nights straight before everything fell silent for about a month. Then, one evening, while cooking, she felt an unsettling presence right behind her. She placed a bowl of crushed Oreos on the counter, turned away, and when she looked back, the bowl was on the floor. She swore she saw a shadow slip around the corner into the living room. The odd happenings continued. Small things out of place, soft knocks at night, that chilling feeling of being watched. And each time something was moved, that same photo of her fiancé was found overturned. Last night was the climax. Home alone with her cat, she heard 3 sharp, deliberate knocks at the front door, more like banging. She checked the house. Everything was normal. Then, an hour later, the lights began flickering wildly, power surging on and off, and again came the knocks, louder and more insistent. She sat in her car, waiting for her fiancé to come home, heart pounding, wondering if she was losing her mind or if something truly paranormal was at play. Then there's a story from my cousin Michael, who worked at his family's trucking company, a small operation with about 17 trucks. One day, he was assigned to manage a newly opened warehouse located in a building from the 1960s, once a metal manufacturing plant. The warehouse was divided into long, narrow sections with front and back doors, docks, and tiny bathrooms. At first, it was just Michael working alone, waiting for shipments and organizing pallets. But then, he started seeing him, the old man. Out of the corner of his eye, Michael would spot a figure in blue jean overalls and a red flannel shirt standing at the end of aisles. When he turned to look, the man vanished. Michael never told anyone, thinking it was just his imagination. Months later, a new employee, Jonathan, joined to run the warehouse. During a casual conversation, Jonathan mentioned the same old man he'd seen. Both shared stories about the mysterious figure, and soon after, strange things escalated. Bathroom doors would slam violently, footsteps echoed with no one there, and even after locking the doors with padlocks, the locks were found on the floor, still locked but somehow removed. One terrifying night, Michael was called in at midnight for an urgent inventory count. As he worked alone, he heard 3 loud knocks on the back door. Frozen, he listened as the knocking repeated. Then, the huge roll-up dock door shook violently, as if someone was trying to tear it off. Fear overtook him. He dropped his clipboard and ran outside, finally locking up and fleeing. The most chilling moment came when Michael was about to sleep. His wife was already asleep, but he suddenly felt a presence. She woke him, asking why he was standing at the foot of the bed. His heart stopped. There was a shadowy figure there, silently watching. When he jumped up, it vanished like a cold breath. After researching, Michael tried speaking directly to the spirit, acknowledging its presence and asking for peace. Since then, the haunting stopped both at the warehouse and his home. And lastly, I want to share a haunting from Sarah, who worked as a cleaner at Samlesbury Hall, a place known for its ghost stories, including the famous White Lady. Sarah never saw the White Lady herself, but she had her own unforgettable encounter. She cleaned small huts on the grounds, never entering the main hall. One rainy day, as she moved between huts, she heard a faint knock on the door, but saw no one through the window. Then, she caught sight of a little girl in the mirror, pale skin, brunette hair tied with a ribbon, wearing an old-fashioned dress. Sarah knew weddings were common there, but none were scheduled that day. Turning back to the door, the girl was gone. 10 minutes later, a real knock came. The girl was there, asking Sarah to help open the hut across from her, saying her mother was at the cafe and she forgot the key. Sarah, not suspecting anything, let her in but noticed the room was cold, beds messy, no luggage around, nothing to suggest anyone was staying there. After finishing her cleaning, Sarah checked the schedule and realized that hut wasn't even meant to be cleaned that day. When she returned to the hut to verify, the window was closed, the door locked, and the girl was nowhere inside. The room was warm and looked as if a family had just left. Sarah never saw the girl again, but is certain what she saw was not human. All these stories remind me that sometimes the unseen touches our lives in ways we can't explain. Moments that slip through reality's cracks, whispers from the past, or shadows lingering just out of sight. And maybe, just maybe, these echoes are part of the fabric of our existence, reminding us there's more to this world than meets the eye. Can someone explain what happened to me? A few summers ago, I spent several days at a friend's cottage near Sable Beach. There were 4 of us, and the whole trip was pretty relaxed. We had a few drinks, cooked, talked, and stayed up late, but I barely drank compared to everyone else. On the first evening, the television was playing in the background. I think it was some travel and food show featuring an old roadside diner. I wasn't really watching it, but for some reason, that diner stayed in my mind. That night, I dreamed I was sitting inside it. I was eating a grilled sandwich when I suddenly started choking. I couldn't breathe at all. Then I woke up. It frightened me for a moment, but I told myself it was only a dream and went back to sleep. The next day, we went swimming and spent most of the afternoon by the water. Other than that, everything felt completely normal. That night, I dreamed about the diner again. This time, I was sitting on a faded red stool at the counter. Beside me was an elderly man in a dark coat. He never spoke or moved. His hands were folded in front of him, and he just stared straight ahead. I started eating another sandwich. Then I began choking again. When I woke up, I could remember every detail. Still, I tried to explain it logically. The television show, the diner, the food. I assumed my mind was simply recycling things I had seen. The third night was different. There was no diner. I was lying on my back in a completely black space. Something heavy was pressing down on my chest, and I couldn't breathe. The choking sensation was even stronger than before. Then I realized I was awake. I was lying partly on my stomach, with my face turned toward the wall. There was a weight on my back, as though someone was leaning over me. For some reason, the first thing I said was, "Nonna, please get off me." My grandmother had died when I was a child. The moment I understood that it couldn't possibly be her, panic took over. I twisted my body as hard as I could and shoved backward. It felt as though something rolled away from me. Instantly, the pressure disappeared. I could move again. I could breathe. But then the smell came. The entire room filled with an awful odor, like sulfur mixed with spoiled meat and damp soil. It was so strong that it almost felt physical, as though the air itself had become thick. I jumped out of bed and ran to the light switch. The second the light came on, the smell vanished. Not slowly, instantly. I didn't sleep in that room again. I spent the rest of the night on the couch. The next morning, my friends asked what had happened, so I told them everything. They tried to reassure me, saying it was probably sleep paralysis. I wanted to believe them. On the 4th night, I fell asleep on the couch. I dreamed that I was still inside the cottage, but somehow it also felt like the house where I grew up. The rooms looked unfamiliar and familiar at the same time, Then the telephone rang. It was an old landline phone, even though there wasn't one in the cottage. I picked it up. My grandmother was on the other end. Her voice sounded exactly as I remembered it, with her soft Italian accent. She spoke in the same mixture of English and Italian she used when I was little. She said, "Go fuori now. Chiama tua madre." Go outside. Call your mother. In the dream, I accepted this without questioning it. I began lowering the phone, ready to do exactly what she had asked. Then something clicked in my mind. I lifted the receiver back to my ear and said, "Nonna, aren't you dead?" Before I could say anything else, her voice became urgent. She said, "Il diavolo è qui." The devil is here. I woke up immediately. The cottage was completely dark. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't wake anyone. I grabbed my keys, walked outside in the clothes I had slept in, got into my car and drove home. I have never returned to that cottage. I need to tell you what's been happening at my house, because lately, I've started feeling like something is living here with us. The house is pretty old. It was built sometime in the late 70s, and the floors creak whenever anyone walks across them. Normally, that wouldn't bother me. Old houses make noise. But almost every night, usually sometime after midnight, I hear footsteps moving through the hallway. Not random pops or settling wood. Footsteps. The only people living here are me and my great-grandmother. Ever since my great-grandfather passed, she's slept in a recliner in the living room. So whenever I hear someone walking around, I get up to check on her. Every time, she's completely asleep. My dog notices things too. He'll suddenly stand up, stare into an empty corner, and start growling. His fur rises along his back, and sometimes he barks so loudly that he wakes my great-grandmother. It always looks like he's watching something move through the room, but I never see anything. A few nights ago, things got worse. My bedroom used to be the master bedroom, so it has a small bathroom attached to it. The layout is strange. The toilet and shower are inside the bathroom, but the sink is outside, built into this huge vintage vanity that takes up nearly half the bedroom. Above it are several cabinets and a long row of bright bulbs. There used to be 2 sinks, but years ago my great-grandmother removed one and covered the opening to make more counter space. That night, I was in the bathroom when I heard something move behind me. It sounded like a cabinet door shifting. I stepped into the bedroom and saw 2 of the upper cabinet doors standing completely open. I know I hadn't opened them. I'm careful about keeping them shut because they hang low enough that I've hit my head on them before. And it wasn't the first time. A few days earlier, I'd been sitting in my chair playing a game when I noticed movement above the vanity. I looked up just in time to watch one of those cabinet doors slowly swing open by itself. There was no breeze. No one else was in the room. It just opened. Sometimes, when my dog starts barking during the night, I find my great-grandmother sitting awake in the living room, terrified. She always says the same thing. There's somebody outside. They're standing in the yard. She has vivid dreams, and she was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so at first, I assumed she was waking up confused. I would calm her down, check the doors, and tell her everything was fine. Now I'm not sure it is. The strangest part is that our house isn't the only one where this is happening. A woman named Mara lives directly across the road. We've known each other since we were kids, and her father has been close to my family for years. She recently moved back into her childhood home with her husband so they could repair it. When I told her about the footsteps in the cabinet doors, she went quiet. Then she told me they'd been hearing footsteps too. Their back entrance opens directly into their bedroom. One evening, her husband came inside after working in the yard and sat down to rest. A few minutes later, he heard someone sprinting through the hallway. He rushed out of the bedroom. Every door along the hallway was standing open. Mara also has a motion-activated security camera. Something keeps interfering with it. The camera turns toward empty parts of the yard, gets unplugged, or suddenly stops recording. Most of the time, the footage shows nothing. Once, it caught a blurry shape that looked almost human. There are also entire sections of footage missing, as though someone switched the camera off and turned it back on later. They've found signs that something has been walking through their yard, but they've never caught anyone doing it. Then I told Mara about the figure I saw in my front yard after coming home from work one night. At first, I thought it was the remains of an old shrub near the driveway, but the shape was too tall, too wide, and several feet away from where the shrub actually was. When I mentioned it, Mara's face lost all its color. She looked at me and whispered, "You saw it too?" Behind her house, there's a thick patch of bamboo. It's so tightly packed that even a person couldn't push through it. While we were standing outside talking, the bamboo suddenly started shaking. Then something inside it made this deep, twisted sound. It almost sounded like something trying to imitate a cow, but getting the noise wrong. There are no cattle nearby, and nothing that large could possibly fit inside that bamboo. Mara stared at the moving stalks, then turned to me. "There's something living in there," she said quietly. "We're scared of it. I don't know what's happening in this neighborhood. Maybe somebody brought something here that they shouldn't have. Maybe it noticed me because I haven't been doing well emotionally, and I've been more vulnerable than usual." For a while, the activity seemed to calm down. Now it's starting again, and it feels angrier. Several of my nieces and nephews are staying with us at the moment. The oldest girl and the youngest boy, who are 10 and 5, have started having violent night terrors. When it happens, we can't wake them. They scream, kick, and lash out at anyone who comes near them. Then, in the morning, they remember nothing. I'm tired of pretending this is normal. I'm tired of hearing warped voices outside my bedroom. I'm tired of seeing shapes in the yard. I'm tired of cabinet doors moving, footsteps in empty rooms, and scratching against the windows after dark. This is my family's home. I plan to live here for the rest of my life. Whatever is here needs to understand something. It is not welcome. And I'm not leaving. Hi, you can call me Jay. That isn't my real name, and strangely enough, my actual name doesn't even contain a J. It's just what my family has called me for as long as I can remember. For years, I kept a journal filled with story ideas. I would write down strange premises, unsettling scenes, little fragments I thought might become horror stories someday. Then it occurred to me that I didn't need to invent one. I had already lived through something horrifying. Something I still can't explain. You don't have to believe me. I understand how this sounds. But whether anyone believes it or not doesn't change what happened, or the fact that part of me is still afraid it might happen again. I grew up in a Catholic household, though I'm no longer Catholic. There were 6 of us: my mother, my father, my 3 older sisters, and me. The experiences began when I was around 9 years old and continued through most of middle school. I can't remember exactly when they stopped. There wasn't one final encounter or some dramatic ending. They simply became less frequent, and then one day I realized it had been a long time since anything had happened. Honestly, that almost made it worse. When something ends without explanation, you never know whether it is truly gone or merely quiet. There were also things about my family that I didn't understand until I was older. My mother had experimented with witchcraft when she was younger. One of my sisters spent time visiting supposedly haunted places with friends. 2 relatives had also passed away from illness inside our home. Looking back, it feels as though our house had collected grief, fear, and strange beliefs from several different directions. Still, knowing those details never helped me understand why the experiences seemed so focused on me. We didn't have much money growing up. Sometimes we bought military ration packs from people selling surplus supplies near the base. My parents sold second-hand items at flea markets and weekend yard sales to make extra cash. Whenever relatives stayed with us, they usually took the bedrooms, and the kids slept on couches or blankets in the living room. Our house had 3 bedrooms, so my sisters and I rotated depending on who was living at home at the time. When my oldest sister eventually moved away, I was finally given a bedroom of my own. I remember feeling so proud. I had my own door, my own bed, my own private space. It was supposed to feel like freedom. Instead, that room became the place I feared most. The first incidents usually began with me waking face down in my pillow. I would be completely unable to move. There was no hand pressing against me and no visible weight on my back, but I felt as though something was forcing my face deeper into the pillow. Panic would surge through me because I knew the air was right there, only inches away, yet my body refused to respond. I would fight as hard as I could, trying to move a finger, turn my neck, anything. Eventually, my body would jerk violently enough for me to lift my face and drag in a breath. The moment I took that first breath, the paralysis would vanish. I could move again. Those episodes happened every so often, but they weren't the worst part. On other nights, I would wake up with the strong sense that it was around 3 in the morning. I never checked the clock. I was too frightened to move my eyes away from the room. People have told me it was sleep paralysis. Others have called it night terrors. I've experienced both as an adult, and neither felt like what happened back then. When I opened my eyes, I would see 3 figures standing around my bed. 2 stood beside each other on my left. The third stood at the foot of the bed. They were shaped like people, but I couldn't make out faces, clothing, or any clear features. They looked less like shadows and more like spaces where the darkness had become solid. The frightening thing was that I could move. I could blink. I could breathe. I could turn my head if I wanted to. But every part of me seemed to understand one rule. They could not know I was awake. I believed, with the absolute certainty only a terrified child can feel, that if those figures realized I could see them, I would die. So I would move very slowly. I would turn away from the 2 figures beside me and face the wall. Then I would lie there without making a sound, sometimes for what felt like hours, waiting for sunlight to appear around the curtains. Sometimes I fell asleep again. That was rarely a relief. I would dream about monstrous faces, fires, demons, and people I loved being hurt in ways no child should be able to imagine. I would wake exhausted, but I was too scared to tell anyone the full details. My mother insisted I was having nightmares. Considering her own past interest in sprawling things, I always found that response a little frustrating, but perhaps dismissing it was her way of dealing with something she didn't understand either. One night, I refused to sleep in my bedroom. I cried until my parents finally allowed me to lie between them in their bed. I remember feeling safe for the first time in weeks. My father was on one side of me, my mother on the other, both of them snoring. Then I woke up. The bedroom door was open. Across the room, standing in the hallway, was one of the figures. It didn't move. It simply stood beyond the doorway, staring into the room. My parents were close enough for me to touch, but I couldn't make myself wake them. I was convinced that making a sound would cause the figure to come closer. I lay there between them until morning. After that, they didn't let me sleep in their room again. Their reasoning was simple. I had my own bedroom. Years passed, and the activity gradually faded. When I was in high school, one of my sisters got married. The wedding photographer stayed at our house for the night, and my old bedroom was offered to him. Before he went to sleep, I warned him. I told him to sleep on his right side. I also told him that if he woke during the night and felt that someone was in the room, he should keep his eyes closed. He laughed. To be fair, I probably would have laughed too if a teenager had given me those instructions. The next morning, he came into the kitchen looking terrible. The skin beneath his eyes was so dark that it almost looked bruised. He said he had experienced the worst nightmares of his life. He couldn't remember every detail, only that he had spent the entire night feeling trapped and watched. He also said it felt as though he had slept on a floor covered in stones. My old mattress was uncomfortable, but it wasn't that uncomfortable. I wish I had a satisfying explanation for all of this. Maybe the figures were hallucinations. Maybe they were some unusual form of sleep disorder. Maybe the stress inside our home affected me more deeply than I understood. Or maybe something really was standing beside my bed. I still think about those nights more often than I'd like to admit. What frightens me most isn't the memory of seeing the figures. It's the possibility that they didn't disappear. Maybe they simply realized I had learned not to open my eyes. I've worked as a paranormal investigator for nearly 11 years, and one of the first things you learn in this field is how to separate your feelings from the facts. You document what happened. You check the equipment. You look for ordinary explanations before considering anything else. But there's one experience I've never been able to file away neatly. It happened in 2017, after an investigation near Mad Island, just outside Mumbai. I was working with a small paranormal research team at the time, and the location had a reputation for strange activity. I won't get into everything that happened during the investigation, because that's a story on its own. But the atmosphere that night was unusually heavy. Our audio recorders kept cutting out. The temperature readings shifted without explanation, and at one point, every person in the room became completely silent. Nobody asked the others why. We all seemed to feel the same thing. By the time we packed up, it was well past midnight. I loaded my equipment onto my motorcycle and started riding home alone. About 10 minutes into the journey, I felt the back of the bike sink slightly. Then I felt pressure against the seat behind me. It felt exactly like someone had climbed onto the motorcycle. There was no loose equipment back there. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the road. The weight stayed steady, following every turn I made. I didn't look behind me. And I want to be honest, that wasn't because I was fearless. I was terrified. But experience had taught me that there are moments when curiosity is not your friend. Sometimes the safest thing you can do is keep your eyes forward, stay calm, and head towards somewhere familiar. So that's what I did. I rode straight home without stopping. Once I got inside, I followed my usual routine. I took a shower, cleaned the equipment, and sat down to review the recordings and notes from the investigation. Nothing immediately stood out. I was exhausted, so after logging a few observations, I went to bed. Sometime before dawn, I woke up because someone was calling my name. It was my father's voice. My father had died almost 10 years earlier. The voice wasn't distant or distorted. It sounded close, clear, and completely familiar. For a moment, I almost answered automatically. Then I remembered that I was alone. Before I could fully process what I'd heard, there were 3 knocks on my bedroom door. Slow knocks. Knock. 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 I stayed completely still. I didn't call out, and I didn't open the door. Something inside me was warning me not to respond. After a few minutes, the room became quiet again, but the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt watchful. I became convinced that whatever I had felt sitting behind me on the motorcycle had followed me home. I got out of bed, prepared a bowl of salt water, and performed a cleansing throughout the apartment. I washed the entrance, placed salt near the doorway and kept the lights on until sunrise. The next morning, my neighbor called me outside. There were 2 dead crows lying directly in front of my door. There was no blood, no sign that another animal had attacked them. They were simply lying side by side at the threshold. My neighbor asked me what I thought had happened. I didn't know what to tell him. Even now, I try to approach the experience rationally. The feeling on the motorcycle could have been caused by exhaustion. The voice might have been a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. I understand that. But I still can't explain the 3 knocks. And I can't explain the 2 crows appearing at my door the following morning. After all these years, I've learned that not every investigation ends when you leave the location. Sometimes you bring back a memory. Sometimes you bring back fear. And sometimes you can't help wondering whether something else came home with you. I still think about that ride. I think about the weight behind me and the person, or presence, I refused to turn around and see. And honestly, I'm glad I never looked. I wouldn't call this a scary story. Honestly, I'm not even sure what to call it. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence. Or maybe it felt like I was somehow seeing another version of my life. For several months, I kept dreaming about the same boy. It wasn't every night, but it happened often enough that I would spend days thinking about it afterward. I kept asking myself, why am I dreaming about him? Who is he? The dream was always almost identical. We were both around 8 or 9 years old, sitting together in a small backyard and playing. At some point, he would suddenly run away, laughing, and I would shout his name. Raphael! Then I would run after him. I dreamed about that scene again and again. Eventually, I knew exactly what he looked like. He had pale skin, hazel green eyes, and dark hair with one loose strand that always fell across his forehead. Then, for a few months, the dream stopped. I thought maybe they were finally over, until one night I dreamed about him again. But this time, everything was different. We weren't children anymore. We were adults, standing at a funeral. He looked close to my age, maybe a little older, around 27 or 28. He was crying, and everyone around us was dressed in dark clothing. I kept looking around, trying to understand who had died, but I couldn't recognize anyone. The strangest part was that I knew I was dreaming. I walked up to him and said, "I need to know who you are." He didn't answer. He just handed me a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, I saw a name written clearly across the page. Raphael Robles. Then I woke up. Normally dreams fade after a few minutes, but this one stayed with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, curiosity took over, and I searched the name on Facebook. I went through profile after profile, but none of them seemed familiar. Then I found one that immediately caught my attention. The moment I opened it, my heart started racing. It was him. It was the same man I had seen at the funeral in my dream. His profile was private, so I couldn't see much, but some of his older photos were visible. There were pictures of him as a child, and I swear it was the same boy from my dreams. The same eyes, the same face, even the same strand of hair falling toward his forehead. I also saw posts suggesting that his mother had passed away recently. That was when I started to panic. I tried to convince myself that I must have seen him somewhere before and simply forgotten. Maybe my conscious mind didn't remember him, but my subconscious did. But we had no mutual friends. We didn't live in the same area. There was nothing connecting us. At one point, I started writing him a message, but I deleted it before sending it. What could I possibly have said? "Hello, you don't know me, but I've been dreaming about you since we were children." It sounded impossible. I searched for him on Instagram and even asked a friend to help, but we couldn't find anything. Then, a few days later, his profile suddenly appeared in my suggested accounts. I followed him, and somehow, the story became even stranger. One evening, after leaving work, I sat next to a man on the bus. We started talking during the ride, exchanged numbers, and eventually became friends. When we followed each other on Instagram, I noticed that he was also following Raphael. I asked him, "Do you know this person?" He said yes. Apparently, Raphael had been his neighbor when they were children. But I had never lived anywhere near that neighborhood. I had never even visited that part of the city. So now I honestly don't know what to think. Maybe there is a perfectly logical explanation. Maybe my mind noticed something that I don't consciously remember. Or maybe it was all an unbelievable series of coincidences. I know this story sounds invented, but it really happened. I'm sharing it because I want to know whether anyone else has experienced something similar, or whether someone can explain how a complete stranger could appear in my dreams long before I ever found him in real life. Thank you for listening. Let me tell you an old story from the northern lands of Lana. It is a story about war, sacred magic, and the creature our ancestors called the Sueya Yen, or Sueya Saming, the were-tiger. Long ago, during an age when goodness still held more power than evil, a terrible war spread across the land. Kings gathered their armies, generals marched beneath heavy banners, and soldiers fought year after year until no one could remember what had started the bloodshed. Among those rulers was a king named Surya. Unlike the others, King Surya had grown sick at heart from seeing so many lives destroyed. He sent messengers carrying offers of peace. He arranged meetings between rival kingdoms. He proposed truces, exchanges, and compromises. Nothing worked. The rulers had become too proud, and the warriors had grown too accustomed to fighting. At last, Surya left his palace and walked alone into the deepest part of the forest. He found a quiet place beneath an ancient tree, far from roads and villages, and there, he began a life of meditation and hardship. He prayed for the wisdom to stop the war. He remained in the wilderness for 7 years, 7 months, and several days. During that time, his hair grew past his shoulders, his beard covered his chest, and his royal appearance disappeared beneath dust, leaves, and weathered robes. Still, he did not abandon his purpose. One evening, as the forest darkened and the first stars appeared, a celestial being named Suradev descended before him. Suradev had watched the king's devotion and understood that Surya did not seek power for wealth or conquest. He wanted only to end the suffering of his people. The celestial being taught him a sacred incantation capable of giving force to his spoken commands. He also placed a portion of his own spirit within the king. "Whenever you recite the sacred words," Suradev told him, "this spirit will awaken and strengthen your voice. But remember, such power must be guided by compassion. Without virtue, it becomes a curse." Then the celestial being vanished into the night sky. King Surya returned to the battlefield. When he arrived, the fighting was as fierce as ever. Arrows crossed the sky, blades struck shields, and wounded men lay scattered across the earth. The king stood between the armies and began to recite the incantation. Then, he raised his voice. "Let the fighting end!" At once, an overwhelming weariness fell upon everyone. Kings lowered their weapons. Generals forgot their commands. Soldiers stepped backward as though waking from a fever. Before long, both armies had withdrawn to opposite sides of the field. For the first time in years, the land became quiet. But the hatred within their hearts had not disappeared. The warriors stared at King Surya in confusion. They could not understand why they had obeyed him. Their confusion soon became anger, and they surrounded him. One ruler demanded that Suraya destroy his weapons and kneel before them as a prisoner. The king refused. Instead, he decided to show them the power they were challenging. He pointed toward one warrior and commanded that the man's sword fall from his hand. It did. He spoke again, and another warrior collapsed as though struck down by an invisible blade. The crowd recoiled in terror. But King Suraya had no wish to kill anyone. He immediately commanded the fallen man to rise, healed and unharmed. The warrior opened his eyes and stood. Not even a wound remained upon him. Surely, the king thought, this would convince them. It did not. The soldiers rushed forward, determined to destroy the man who had taken control of their battle. Before they could reach him, King Suraya vanished. A moment later, he appeared high above them in the sky, descending slowly until his feet touched the earth. Some fled. Others accused him of hiding behind illusions, so the king stood still and allowed them to attack. Swords struck his body but left no cuts. Spears bent against him. Arrows fell broken at his feet. No matter how fiercely the warriors attacked, they could not leave even the smallest mark. At last, their anger gave way to fear, and their fear gave way to surrender. The Great War ended that day. News of King Suraya's abilities spread through every kingdom. Unfortunately, many people were more interested in his power than in the compassion that had guided him. Sorcerers entered forests, vines, mountains, and riverbanks. They fasted, meditated, and called upon Suradev, hoping to receive the same blessing. A few succeeded in gaining the celestial being's attention, but whenever they asked for King Surya's power, Suradev gave them the same answer. You must learn it from the king. And so they came before Surya. The king agreed to teach those who appeared sincere. His students later carried fragments of the knowledge back to their own lands, sharing it with trusted guardians and royal protectors. Over time, these teachings became different schools of sacred and occult practice. But there was one warning that none of the students could afford to forget. The magic would not serve a cruel or selfish heart. Anyone who studied it while secretly longing to harm others would never master the sacred words. Instead, the divine spirit would turn against that person, reshaping the body to reveal the darkness within. Those who performed the forbidden rituals beside a river would become great serpents. Those who practiced in caves or deep forests would become were-tigers. The transformation could not be reversed. Once a person became a Sua Yen, the human mind slowly disappeared beneath hunger and instinct. The creature would wander through the wilderness, hunting animals at first, then people. It might imitate a familiar voice to lure travelers away from the road. It might appear as a lonely stranger beside a fire. In some tales, it could even wear a human face for a short time. But beneath that borrowed appearance, the tiger remained. The curse would continue until the creature was finally slain. Only then would the corrupted spirit be released from its beastly form. And that, according to the old Lana storytellers, is how the first Sua Yen came into existence. The story was never meant only to frighten people away from dark forests. Its deeper warning was meant for anyone who possessed knowledge, talent, authority, or unusual ability. Power itself is not evil. King Surya used it to stop a war and restore life. Others sought the same power because they wanted control, admiration, or revenge, and it consumed them. That is the lesson hidden inside the legend. The greater a person's ability becomes, the more carefully that person must guard the heart. Because when power grows faster than compassion, the human face may remain for a while, but something wild has already begun to awaken beneath it. Hey, I want to share something pretty personal with you. Something that's been a part of my life for a while now. I'm Lucas. I'm 17 years old, and I've always been a bit sensitive to things most people don't notice. things that feel supernatural. This story I'm about to tell you, it's real. It happened right here in the Netherlands, in the house I live in now. And honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it all. It all started when I was about 14. I was lying in bed one night, just drifting off, when, suddenly, I blinked. But this wasn't a normal blink. It felt like time itself stretched out for what must have been 15 minutes, even though no time actually passed. And in that blink, I saw something in the hallway. It wasn't a person or an animal, but more like a swirl of black smoke. And in the middle of that smoke were these bright yellow eyes, like glowing embers, staring right through me. I could feel those eyes piercing into me, like they knew me on some deep, unsettling level. It's hard to describe, but it was chilling, not something you ever want to feel. After that, I was pretty uneasy, but I tried to brush it off and went back to sleep. For a while, nothing strange happened. Then one night, probably around 2 or 3 in the morning, I was up late watching Netflix. I went to check on my brother. He sleeps in the room right next to mine, to make sure he was asleep so I wouldn't disturb him with the TV noise. When I opened his door, I heard him snoring really loudly, completely at ease. So I just closed the door quietly and left him be. The next morning, I mentioned how loud his snoring was and asked how he'd slept. His reaction caught me off guard. He turned pale, like all the color drained from his face. You see, my brother is terrified of ghosts, and he told me he actually didn't sleep in his room at all. Instead, he spent the whole night in our mom's bed downstairs, on the other side of the house, because he felt something strange in his room. That really got me curious. So, being the curious and maybe a little foolish 14-year-old I was, I ordered a Ouija board online. I decided to try it out alone. I know, that's probably not the smartest move. The board even spelled out that it wanted to hurt me, which freaked me out a bit. But nothing terrible happened. At least, nothing that I'm aware of. 3 years later, I'm still here, telling you this story, so I guess I got lucky. But then came the last experience, the one that scared me the most. I was 15, again up late, around 2 or 3 in the morning. I went downstairs to grab some snacks. When I came back upstairs, I felt this intense, overwhelming feeling of discomfort. It was like the air itself was thick and heavy. My brother's room is just to the left of the stairs, so I glanced over at his door as I usually do. And there she was, the thing no one ever wants to see. I'm honestly shivering just thinking about it now. A humanoid woman standing in the doorway. She was incredibly tall, maybe around 2.3 meters, wearing a long white dress. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly, and it looked like it was full of holes, like her body was decaying or torn in places. Her long black hair hung down, covering her face completely, so I couldn't see her eyes. But I knew she was looking at me. Behind her, where my brother's bed should have been, there was nothing but a darkness so deep and absolute, it felt like it swallowed every bit of light, blacker than anything I've ever seen. Even though the door was wide open, I could only see about 5 centimeters past her before it was just pure black. I was so terrified I collapsed right there on the floor. The next thing I remember, I woke up minutes later, and the door to my brother's room was closed. That was strange because he never closes his door. It scares him. The next morning, I asked him if he'd felt anything odd overnight, but he just looked confused and said no. I'm not making this up. I've been searching for answers ever since, but I haven't found anything that really explains it. This house holds something I can't fully understand yet. And honestly, sometimes I wonder if it ever will. I guess I should start with the apartment. Me, my mom, and later my little sister moved into this concrete apartment block in one of the dullest parts of the city. Nothing charming, nothing dramatic, just gray buildings, thin walls, and the kind of quiet that feels more empty than peaceful. We moved there because it was affordable. It had 2 bedrooms, a tiny bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, and 2 balconies. Honestly, it was cozy enough. Not perfect, but it worked. Before we moved in, someone told us an elderly woman had died there. That did not really shock us. In Germany, that kind of thing is not exactly rare. Even in our old place, someone had passed away before. For the first couple of years, nothing really happened. Then, in the summer of 2023, everything changed. It was around midday. I was standing by my bedroom door, about to go to the kitchen because my mom had bought snacks. And right before I stepped out, I heard my dad call my full name. Not just any voice, his voice. He had passed away the year before, in Thailand. But this sounded exactly like him. The same gentle tone he used when I was younger, back when I would ask him random questions about the world, like why the earth spins and how gravity works. The voice came from the living room, which was the farthest room from mine. I froze. Then I backed away and distracted myself with cartoons because I did not know what else to do. A few days later, I heard his voice again. This time it was quieter, more like an echo. I could not make out the words, but I knew the sound of him. Then it stopped for a while. I told myself it was probably stress, maybe grief. Maybe I had watched too many ghost videos online and my brain was playing tricks on me. But then it happened again. Near the end of summer, I was in my mom's room, looking for something I had lost. My mom was out buying groceries, and my little sister was not home either. That was when I heard my mom's voice say my nickname. It sounded muffled, almost muddy, but it was her voice. I left the room immediately. I did not go back in there for the rest of the week. After that, something about the apartment felt different. In winter, I started hearing knocks at my window. Then I saw something outside. A shadow. Tall, maybe over 2.5 meters. Its head was oval-shaped, with no hair, and its arms were too long. The fingers looked stretched out. I saw it several times. By spring, my dad's voice came back. It called my name, my nickname, even the name of a friend he had never met. Sometimes it would say random things, like the name of a drink he used to like. Then I started hearing my mom's voice too. Hers sounded more distorted, speaking in Arabic sometimes, calling for me. I kept trying to explain it away. I kept telling myself, this is just my brain. This is just stress. This is nothing. But then the curtains in the living room began moving when there was no wind. No open window. No one walking past them. Nothing. In autumn, things got worse. Doors moved on their own. Things shifted places. The fridge started acting strange. My bedroom door moved more than once when nobody had touched it. Then came early 2025. That was when I first saw the black figure in my room. I sleep with a strong light on because I have always been afraid of the dark for other reasons. So my room was not shadowy. I could see clearly enough. The closet door was slightly open, and there was a dark figure standing there, watching me. This time, it had eyes. I tried to convince myself it was sleep paralysis, but I could move. I could speak. I could feel my body. I was not dreaming. I thought maybe it was my eyesight, but even with my glasses, I could still see it. It did not hurt me. It just watched. And the strangest part is, after a while, I got used to it. Not comfortable exactly, just used to being watched. For a while, life felt almost normal again. I met my girlfriend Nina, and things actually felt good. I thought maybe whatever had been happening was finally over. Then, the first night she came into my room, the figure came back. Only this time, it was closer. It did not touch me. I could not see its eyes anymore, but I knew it was there. A couple of weeks later, I got this horrible feeling that something was very wrong. It felt heavy, like the air had turned thick around me. I texted Nina and told her that if anything happened, I loved her. Nothing happened that night, but the feeling stayed with me for hours. After that, the figure returned a few times, but I started sleeping through it. Then, around December, my dad's voice came back again. But this time, it was not clear or warm. It was just mumbling. Nonsense. That scared me more than the voice itself, because my dad was not like that. He was educated, careful with words, and very precise when he spoke. And then this year, things changed again. I started seeing flashes of things that did not really happen. I would see my mom open my bedroom door, just for a few seconds, but when I checked, the door had not moved. I saw my pillow being pulled away, but it was still there. Then the dreams started. One dream was about my mother hurting me after finding knives hidden in my closet. The strange thing is, I had only recently found them myself, and I do not remember putting them there. Another dream was pitch black, except for a woman standing in front of me. She had racks on her back filled with masks. When I told Nina, she said maybe the masks represented how people see my mother one way, while I know another side of her. And honestly, that made too much sense. After that, I dreamed about being in a mental hospital. I dreamed about finding answers to why people exist. Dreams that felt heavier than normal dreams should feel. Then, about 2 months ago, the figure started touching me. At first, it was my hair, very lightly. Then my legs. Then my stomach. The most recent time, about a week ago, it tried to cover my eyes. That is the part I keep coming back to. Because hearing things is one thing, seeing things is another. But feeling something touch you when you are awake is different. Now, Nina and I are planning to try to talk to whatever is in the apartment. We are doing some research first, because I do not want to be careless. I do not know what is happening in that place. Maybe it is grief. Maybe it is fear. Maybe it is something in the apartment. But whatever it is, it has stopped feeling random. It feels aware. And lately, it feels like it is getting closer. Hey, I want to share a story with you. Something pretty intense that happened to me and my wife, Jenna. We got married in the fall of 2012 and moved into our first house together. It was in a quiet, friendly neighborhood, the kind where neighbors wave and kids play outside. But from the very first night in the house, something felt off. I sensed it immediately, even if Jenna didn't admit it at first. The house was an old two-story from the 1940s, with wooden floors that creaked and groaned like they had stories to tell. The air had this musty smell, kind of like an old museum or historic home, something that reminded me of a trip I took as a kid to an old battlefield site. Upstairs, we had 2 bedrooms separated by a bathroom. Jenna's space was a little storage and makeup room, and mine was the bedroom to the right at the top of the stairs. I remember the basement door in the kitchen corner. Just looking down those dark concrete steps was enough to send a chill through us. Jenna refused to go down there alone. I tried to brush off the weird noises, the bangs and creaks, as the house settling, but deep down, I knew it was something else. One night, I was up late watching a horror movie, and I heard light, quick footsteps pacing above the living room couch in Jenna's makeup room. It was strange because Jenna was already asleep, wrapped up in bed. When I told her, she just laughed it off, chalking it up to my imagination. But then, one evening, she called me from home, whispering that she could hear someone walking upstairs, and she was scared. I rushed home to find her standing in the kitchen, wide-eyed and terrified. We stood there, listening to footsteps pacing nervously around the room, circling, not the usual back and forth. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find and cautiously went upstairs. Just as I reached the top, the footsteps stopped, and when I flipped on the light, the bulb flickered and went out. The room was pitch black. I shone my phone light around. Nothing. But Jenna believed me then. A few days later, Jenna had some friends over for a birthday night. We watched a scary movie and told ghost stories, trying to keep things light. Suddenly, a framed picture of us flew off the wall and slammed face down on the glass table, not even close to anyone. Everyone screamed. It was like the house was trying to tell us something. Jenna once told me, "When I'm not here, I feel happy, but when I walk inside this house, I feel the weight of sadness." I felt it too, like the house was feeding on our fear and frustration. We started arguing more, over little things like dishes or plans. It was strange, and we both agreed it wasn't really us. Something dark was in that house. By November, things got worse. One night, I felt my heart racing uncontrollably, numbness creeping down my face and arm. Doctors later said it was panic attacks, but it only ever happened at home. Jenna was breaking down, scared for me. One night, while watching a movie downstairs, I went to get laundry in the basement. That hateful feeling was stronger than ever, and I smelled rotten eggs. Then, from a dark corner, I heard a voice repeat a chilling line from the film. "I rip and cut and mutilate the innocent." The voice was exactly like the movies, but there was no TV down there. I dropped everything and ran upstairs, slamming the door behind me. Jenna later told me she'd smelled the same awful stench and blamed our new puppy, Henry, but we both knew better. Winter was brutal, forcing us to stay inside more, and the house's eerie activity escalated. Knocks on walls, objects moving, and those footsteps pacing above. One night, Henry froze and growled as the stomping footsteps came down the stairs. I grabbed him and bolted outside into the snow, feeling a shadow cross the kitchen window. I yelled at the basement, trying to fight back the fear. Over the months, strange things kept happening. A plate flying off the wall, a hanging plant swinging with no wind, knocking on the bathroom door when Jenna wasn't even there. The knocks always came in threes, which I later learned could be a dark sign. We tried to stay positive, laughing and watching comedies, and as spring came, the activity eased. We moved out as soon as our lease was up, finally free from that darkness. But the story doesn't end there. One summer evening, I drove past the old house and felt that familiar dread. It was empty, with a for sale sign out front. Then, through the window, I saw it. A pale, scowling face, with dark eyes staring right at me, framed by white hair like an old colonial wig. We weren't alone in that house after all. Later, a neighbor told Jenna, "That place is absolutely haunted." And after everything we lived through, I believe her. It was the hardest year of our lives, but we made it through together. And I'm sharing this so you know sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more than just stories. Hey there, I want to share a story with you, something that stuck with me for years. When I was about 10, my dad passed away. It was back in '93, and honestly, it hit me hard. After he died, I kept having these dreams about him, not the comforting kind, more like eerie ones. At night, whenever I walked past the living room to grab a drink in the kitchen, this heavy feeling of dread would wash over me. One night, I was heading back from the kitchen and, out of the corner of my eye, I swear I saw him, my dad, sitting in his old recliner, just sitting there in the dark, staring right at me. It was only a blink, but it scared me so much I bolted to my room, locked the door, and hid under my covers. I had this buddy named Ben. My dad used to tease him a lot, mostly about how skinny he was. I'd come home from Ben's place, and Dad would ask me stuff like, "What color shirt was Ben wearing today?" He was a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy. Fast forward 3 years. Ben was over for a sleepover, and we were crashing in the living room with our sleeping bags. My sleeping bag was right at the foot of that same recliner. Yeah, it was mine now. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, I was shaken awake. It was Ben, whispering my name, sounding panicked and confused. I rubbed my eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" He looked terrified. The kitchen light above the oven was always on at night, so I could see his face clearly. "What did you want?" he kept asking, and I was totally confused. I told him I hadn't said anything. He looked even more scared and sat there silently for a moment. Then he said, "Dude, I thought it was you, but..." I interrupted, annoyed. "But what?" It was the middle of the night, and I just wanted to get back to sleep. He said, "I felt it. Someone whispered, 'Hey Ben,' right in my ear. I thought it was you." I told him it wasn't me, probably just a dream. But then he shook his head. "No, man, I was awake. I'd just come back from the kitchen, shut my eyes, and someone whispered that. Now that I think about it, it sounded just like your dad." That hit me like a lightning bolt. We looked at each other, both scared out of our minds. I'd never told Ben about seeing my dad in that chair, and I hadn't shared that just before he woke me. I dreamed my dad showed up on our front porch, like he hadn't really died. He'd just left and come back. Ben woke me up to tell me this. Ben has held on to this story for 25 years now. I honestly think it was my dad playing some kind of trick. Either way, neither of us got much sleep that night. At least, I didn't. Hey there, I want to share a story from my younger days, something that still sends a chill down my spine whenever I think about it. When I was about 20, working overnight shifts as a supervisor at this little neighborhood pharmacy on Maple Street, everything was usually pretty slow and uneventful. But one cold fall night, something strange happened that I'll never forget. As I clocked in, I noticed this woman leaning against the counter talking to the cashier. She was dressed oddly, wearing this vintage velvet hat that looked like it belonged to a different century, maybe the 1920s or something. She seemed a bit jittery, asking the cashier about me like, "Who's that guy with the hood?" I was tired and brushed it off, thinking she was just a little out of it. Hours later, around 1 a.m., I spotted her again sitting by the pharmacy, despite it being closed, and she had these big dark glasses and a faded coat on. She was holding a couple of bags, and I just assumed she was waiting for a ride. But she'd been there for hours. The cashier confided that the woman was making her uneasy, constantly asking if I was some kind of undercover cop. I figured she was probably lonely or maybe a bit paranoid, so I decided to chat with her to put her at ease. At first, she shared wild stories about her past, married to an oil magnate, owning fancy homes along the coast, traveling to Europe every year. But as she talked, I noticed her worn-out boots, the wild, patchy red hair fading to gray, and her weathered face. Nothing screamed wealthy socialite. Then she started talking about her neighbors trying to harm her, spying, and even how they'd killed all her cats. She whispered about the CIA watching her through giant TVs and asked if the girls up front were FBI agents. It was a lot to take in. I was about to call her a cab when she suddenly vanished. I looked everywhere, the aisles, bathrooms, even locked offices, but no sign of her. The only place left was the basement storage. Her bags and purse were spread out near some boxes, but she was gone. Heart pounding, I slowly descended into the basement, calling out. Then, from the shadows behind some shelves, I saw her crouch down, holding something long and slim. She whispered, "Shh, no, he's with the police," and started crawling towards me on her hands and knees. I froze for a moment before backing away and rushing upstairs. I called the police, and when they arrived, they went down to confront her. What followed was chaos. She screamed and fought fiercely, slashing one officer who ended up bleeding badly. It took 2 officers and a taser to restrain her. Later, I learned she was a local woman struggling with paranoid schizophrenia, living in a halfway house, with no family to speak of. But what haunts me the most is the look she gave me when they cuffed her. A look so filled with rage and menace, and her words, "I would have killed you." Those words have stayed with me, haunting my dreams years later. Sometimes in those nightmares, I feel like she's lurking just behind me or watching from outside my window, waiting. And honestly, I can't shake the feeling that if I'd made a sound that night in the basement, things could have ended very differently. So yeah, that's my story. The night the quiet pharmacy turned into something out of a nightmare. Hey there. I want to share a story very close to my heart about my little sister Annie. She was taken from us when I was just 8 years old, a little over 2 decades ago. We grew up in a small town called Leavenworth, Washington, nestled deep in the Cascade Mountains. It's a place full of old legends and stories, from native tribes to tales of mysterious creatures that haunt the forests. One legend talks about a strange beast with the head of a wolf, legs like a cougar, claws of a bear, and the eyes of an owl, appearing every couple of centuries enveloped in red fog. After that fog rolls in, children have been said to vanish, never to be found. Annie was 6 when she disappeared. Before then, we were inseparable. We'd often escape to Icicle Creek, a peaceful spot about a half-hour hike away, where we found a brief refuge from the chaos at home. Our dad struggled with anger, and our mom battled her own demons, so those moments by the creek, watching salmon swim upstream, were our little sanctuary. Annie would rest her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, the world was calm. School was tough for us both. We were scarred from abuse, hiding burns and marks under long sleeves, even in summer. The other kids called us names, like the Addams Family, and we stuck together because no one else did. Annie started running away before she disappeared. I'd wake up to find Dad dragging her from the woods, mud-covered and limp. He'd make me watch as he threatened her, and the sounds of those moments haunt my dreams. I often dream of a foggy forest and Annie calling my name, though she always said Feather instead of Heather. Hearing that name in her pain is something I carry with me every day. I never fully understood what happened, but I always suspected Dad was involved. The day she vanished, I remember Mom sitting at the kitchen table, drinking and smoking, while Dad hummed cheerfully as he moved around the house. Police came and went, but the case went cold. I left home at 17, moving to Chicago with my boyfriend. We had a daughter, Olivia, who looks just like Annie. I poured all my love into her, trying to fill the void Annie left. Just last week, after a family loss in California, I took Olivia back to Leavenworth. I wanted to show her where I grew up, maybe find some closure. Our old street looked the same, and the house was still there, though updated. I saw 2 little girls playing outside, and a man with a baby getting out of a car. I felt my heart warm. I introduced myself to the couple who now lived there, a kind Native American pair named Charles and Maya. They invited us in, and I shared stories of Annie and me, our trips to Icicle Creek, and then about her disappearance. Their reaction was different from what I expected. Charles seemed uneasy, and when I mentioned Annie running away, he paused. Then, he said something I couldn't quite process at first. Something so profound it sent me racing to the local hospital I'd known all my life. The same place I'd been driven to so many times before. Inside, I asked if there was an Annie Fredrickson there. The nurse looked at me with understanding. Soon, a gentle doctor came to speak with me. He told me about Annie, about the trauma she'd endured, how she'd been found feral, mute, and unresponsive. Over the years, she had slowly relearned basic human interaction, but remained like a child mentally, frozen in time since she disappeared. He warned me it would be a delicate process, that she might not recognize me, but all I wanted was to see her. After what felt like forever, I was led to her room. There she was, thin, fragile, clutching a pillow like a child with a teddy bear, her blonde hair partly hiding her face. My heart shattered and soared all at once. I knelt beside her, kissed the scars I remembered, and whispered, "Annie, I've missed you so much." At first, she held me loosely, but then her arms tightened around me. She shivered, and then, in a soft, clear whisper, she said the one word I've longed to hear for so many years. "Feather." That moment, all the pain, the years of waiting, the nightmares, they felt like they melted away. I found my little sister again. Hey, I want to share a story my buddy Jake told me a few years back. Something that really stuck with me. So, Jake was a Marine, and this happened just a couple days before he was about to finish his tour. They got intel about some insurgents hiding out in a network of caves near Ad-Dar. Jake and his team split up in threes to search these deep, dark caverns. Every step they took was filled with this heavy tension, like you could almost feel the danger lurking. Stepping on an IED or getting trapped under rubble was a real fear. After they'd gone about 200 yards in, Jake's team leader got a message over the radio. Apparently, a man and woman with rifles were found inside the cave, but they weren't the insurgents they were hunting. Instead, these two were sitting by a small fire, deep inside the cave, with an ancient stone tablet carved in cuneiform. They were detained and taken back to base, but Jake ended up holding onto that tablet. Just as they were about to leave, they heard this terrifying screech echoing from deeper in the cave, like some wild animal, maybe worse. No one wanted to go after it. The tablet itself was strange. The front had writing Jake couldn't decipher, and the back had this unsettling drawing of a snake's head with horns, reptilian eyes, and a forked tongue. Even though the stone was worn down, the image was downright eerie. Jake kept the tablet as a kind of souvenir. Before the couple was loaded into the armored truck, the woman looked right at him and said, "You'd be wise to leave that behind." Creepy, right? In the nights that followed, Jake was plagued by horrible nightmares where he'd see himself harming his wife and daughter. When he woke up, he'd hear this voice cursing him, damning him to hell. He chalked it up to stress, though, weirdly, his sense of smell got super sharp. He could smell flowers from way across the yard. The nightmares didn't stop even after he got home. He showed the tablet to his wife, Lisa, who decided to keep it as a keepsake and placed it on a little shelf on their wall. But then things got worse. Just a couple days after returning, Jake kept waking up in the middle of the night to find Lisa sleepwalking, mumbling, and clearly disoriented. This went on for about 2 weeks, until one night, everything just snapped. Jake got out of the shower and walked into their bedroom to find Lisa sitting on the edge of the bed, completely fixated on the tablet. She didn't respond when he spoke to her. She was like trance-bound. When he gently turned her face toward him, her eyes were wide open, but her irises were pitch black, pupils fully dilated. She was gritting her teeth in this terrifying, angry expression. Pure hatred radiated from her gaze. Then, she started whispering in a voice that didn't sound like her own, stammering in what Jake could only describe as gibberish, or maybe speaking in tongues. Her voice sounded deep, almost like a man's, and the room filled with this awful stench, something like rotten trash in the summer heat. Every hair on Jake's body stood on end. He felt completely vulnerable, like some evil force had taken hold. She looked like she wanted to hurt him. The only thing Jake could think to do was grab her hand, close his eyes, and pray the rosary over and over. Her hands were ice cold and clenched so tight he wouldn't have been able to open them with a crowbar. After what felt like forever, she finally whispered, "Jake?" in her normal, sweet voice. "Jake, what just happened?" she asked. "Oh, baby, are you okay? Tell me what's wrong." She said she didn't remember anything from when she got out of the tub until Jake walked in. "Was I talking?" she asked. "No, you were just staring," he said. Then she said something that made Jake's blood run cold. "Jake, please get rid of that tablet." "Why, babe?" he asked. "Because ever since you brought it home, I've had this feeling like I want to hurt you and Emily. Something evil is in the house." Without hesitation, Jake grabbed the tablet and threw it in the trash outside. The next day, he took it to the river and tossed it in. Since then, everything slowly started to feel normal again. Lisa later told Jake she'd seen shadows moving around the house, both day and night. One time, she saw a black, shadowy mass hovering in the middle of their living room. She said, "I could feel it watching me, and worse, I felt like it hated me." Jake believes that something took hold of Lisa that night, and that if he'd kept the tablet, things could have ended much worse. It's a chilling story, one that really makes you think about the things we bring home and the unseen forces that might come with them. So I was living in this old converted factory building that had been turned into apartments. The place had that heavy, weird energy old industrial buildings get, you know? Like too much concrete, too many dark corners, and a whole lot of history nobody bothered to explain. The first strange thing started when I went downstairs to do laundry. There was a public laundromat in the building, but the easiest way for me to get there was by walking all the way to the opposite side. And right before the stairs that led down to the laundry room, there was this creepy stretch of hallway with a conference room, a gym, and this old showroom space where performances used to happen. Already unsettling. The lighting in that hallway was terrible, and as far as I knew, there weren't any cameras. Every time I walked down there, I had to pass the gym. It had 2 doors close together. One was blocked off, like nobody wanted anyone using it, and the other was usually cracked open. And every time I got a few feet past that closed door, I'd hear this tapping. Not loud, not frantic, just this steady little tap, tap, tap on the glass. But the weird part was, whenever I got right next to the door, it stopped. At first, I didn't take it seriously. I'd just kind of laugh and say, "You know the other door is open, right?" Like I was talking to some awkward person hiding in there. Then one day, the tapping just stopped completely. I didn't even realize how much I'd gotten used to it until things started happening inside my apartment. The first thing was small, but it bothered me. I left for the weekend, and I know I turned off my kitchen light before I left. I'm not saying I think I did. I mean, I absolutely did. But when I came back, the kitchen light was on. At first, I tried to be reasonable. Maybe my landlord had shown the apartment to somebody. Maybe maintenance came in. Maybe there was some explanation that didn't involve me standing there with my overnight bag, feeling like my apartment had been awake while I was gone. So I let it go. About a month later, I got ready for bed like normal. I left the bathroom, climbed into bed, and tried to relax. I lived in a studio, so my bed was right outside the bathroom door. The bathroom light was motion sensor controlled, and it had a timer. Before it shut off, it gave 3 little beeps as a warning. So I'm lying there, and I hear the 3 beeps. And for whatever reason, this awful thought pops into my head. It would be so creepy if the sensor went off again right now. Nothing happened that night, but the next night, the exact same thing happened. The 3 beeps went off, and then the sensor reactivated. Like something moved in there. I froze. I was fully tucked into bed, trying not to breathe too loud, mentally calling on every protective spirit I could think of. My grandma, old family members, Whitney Houston for some reason. Anybody with a little power on the other side, I was like, please clock in. But then nothing else happened. The next day, I checked the bathroom, hoping something had fallen or shifted and triggered the sensor. But everything was exactly where I left it. The following night, I avoided the bathroom completely after dark. I was not interested. I was not available. The bathroom and I were no longer on speaking terms. Then my heater started. It was right next to my bed, and out of nowhere it began making this violent banging sound. Just bam, 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 over and over. It sounded like somebody was hitting the inside of it with a hammer. And before anyone says it was an old radiator, it wasn't. This was a newer unit, not some ancient steam-powered monster throwing a tantrum. That was when I started searching online, because apparently that's what you do when your apartment begins acting haunted. The advice I found basically said to speak out loud and tell whatever it was that it wasn't welcome, and that I wasn't willing to engage with it anymore. So I did. I felt ridiculous standing there in my apartment, talking to the air like I was firing an invisible roommate. But I said it clearly. I told it this was my space, it was not welcome, and it needed to leave me alone. The next day, everything was calm again. After that, little things kept happening here and there. Random objects would be in places I didn't remember leaving them. Lights that had never flickered before would suddenly flicker. I'd hear odd noises sometimes, but I kept telling myself it was an old building. Old buildings groan, pipes knock, floors settle. That's what I wanted to believe anyway. But the last thing that really got me was my shirt. I had this button down hanging in my closet. I knew exactly where it was. I remembered seeing it there a few days before. Then one day, I went to grab it because I had an outfit planned and the shirt was gone. I tore through my closet, checked the hamper, checked random corners, laundry bags, everything. Nothing. And I lived alone, so there was no one to blame. No roommate, no partner, no sibling sneaking in to borrow my clothes. Just me and, apparently, whatever had decided to get involved in my wardrobe. I even told my friend about it because I was so annoyed and creeped out. The next day, I opened the closet. And the shirt was back. Right there on the hanger, exactly where it was supposed to be. I didn't put it there. Nobody else put it there. So yeah, I still don't know what was going on in that apartment, but something in that building definitely knew I was there. So this happened one night around midnight, and I still think about it more than I probably should. I was with my friend Adrian, and he had taken shrooms earlier that evening. I was completely sober, just keeping an eye on him and making sure he was okay. At some point, he said he wanted to go somewhere quiet, somewhere outside, where he could sit in nature and just talk. I knew this little wooded spot with a creek, a place I had been to plenty of times before, so I figured it would be fine. We drove out there, parked, and walked down toward the water. It was dark, really dark, except for the weak little beam from my phone flashlight. We found this fallen tree near the shallow part of the creek and sat there for a while. And honestly, at first, everything felt peaceful. We talked for maybe an hour about life, death, God, spirituality, the universe, all of those big questions people usually save for 2 a.m. conversations. Adrian and I have always had different ways of looking at things, but that is part of why we like talking about it. There was no bad energy. Nothing felt wrong. Then we heard something. It sounded almost like footsteps somewhere nearby. Not loud, but close enough that both of us went quiet. I remember feeling that little cold pinch in my chest, like my body noticed something before my mind did. I wanted to head back toward the car, but Adrian still wanted to walk and keep talking, so we started moving up the road a little. Eventually, we came to this small bridge that goes over the same creek we had been sitting beside. We were halfway across when we both stopped. Down below us, maybe 10 feet away, standing right in the creek, was this tall, white figure. I know how that sounds, I really do, but it was there. It had the shape of a person, sort of, but it was much taller than any person should have been, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. It did not have a face, no eyes, no mouth, no details at all. It was just this bright white, almost glowing shape in the middle of the darkness. The strangest part was that it looked flat somehow, almost one-dimensional, but at the same time, it had this soft, flowing movement to it. The top of its head came to a point, almost like a pointed hood, which feels awful to describe, but that is the closest comparison I have. For a second, neither of us moved. Then the fear hit both of us at once. We ran. We sprinted back to the car like something had flipped a switch inside us. Adrian was panicking because he thought maybe the shrooms had made him see it, but I was sober. Completely sober. And before either of us could influence the other, we described the exact same thing. Same height, same glow, same pointed head, same place in the creek. As we drove away, we kept trying to explain it, but nothing made sense. It did not feel like a person. It did not feel like an animal. It felt like something we were not supposed to understand, something that did not fit neatly into the world we know. And then, after the adrenaline faded, something even stranger happened. We both felt calm. Not relieved exactly, just calm. Almost like whatever we had seen was not chasing us, not threatening us, just existing there. Adrian told me later that before the night started, he had wanted the trip to be spiritual. He had hoped to experience something meaningful, though he did not know what that meant at the time. And the fact that we had been talking about God, death, purpose, and the afterlife right before seeing that thing still gives me chills. We went back during the day more than once, trying to find anything that could explain it. A sign, a branch, a piece of fabric, anything reflective. There was nothing. So I still do not know what we saw that night. Maybe it was something spiritual. Maybe it was something tied to the land. Maybe it was some kind of folklore I have never heard of. All I know is that Adrian saw it, I saw it, and neither of us has ever been able to forget it. You know, it was one of those really strange afternoons when my husband, Jake, came home from work with some bizarre news. He told me that our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Swanston, was expecting a baby. Now, Mrs. Swanston isn't just any neighbor. She's a war widow. Her husband died in the invasion of Normandy, and she never remarried. And get this, she's 92 years old. I mean, the idea of someone almost a century old having a baby? Preposterous, right? Her body has long since passed the time for that kind of thing. So I got this invitation that said, "Celebrate the spring with the birth of a new legacy." And there was this picture of a head, half outlined in blue with short hair, and half in pink with eyelashes and a ponytail. The date was at the bottom. I was curious, but also a bit annoyed. When I arrived, I was the only one there besides Mrs. Swanston and her granddaughter, Isabella. Isabella explained, "Most of Grandma's friends and siblings have passed, and my parents don't really get along with her." I tried to sound polite. "Thank you for the invite," though I was feeling pretty uneasy. Then she asked if I wanted to see the sonogram. I hesitated but said yes. I kept texting Jake, "Where are you? You're late." But no reply. Isabella showed me the black and white image of a perfectly healthy fetus. "Where is your grandma?" I asked. She said, "Oh, she's just getting ready. She wants to look her best for this proud day." I tried to play it cool. Then Isabella asked, with this little sparkle in her eye, "Has your husband been coming home late from work lately?" I was caught off guard. "He has, but how would she know?" "Actually, yes," I said cautiously. "And why do you think you two haven't had children yet?" she pressed. I was stunned. My heart started pounding, and I felt sweat on my forehead. I tried to joke. "Well, jealousy is a sin, right? Especially when it comes to your neighbor's granddaughter. We're a pretty pious family, I'm sure you understand." Just then, I heard slow footsteps coming down the stairs, and my anxiety spiked. "You mean your grandmother?" I asked. Isabella smiled warmly and said, "Oh, sweetie, you're so mistaken. This is my gender reveal party. Do you really think Grandma could have a baby at 92? My breath caught, my mind racing. "What are you telling me?" She leaned in and said, "We've taken care of everything. Not just your divorce, but the life insurance too. And here she is. Over here, Grandma." My hands trembled as Mrs. Swanston appeared, stepping into the room in her orthopedic shoes. Then she turned to me, and I nearly fainted. Her eyes were behind the mask of my husband's carved-off face, the same face spread across hers, with a gray bun sticking out the back. In that moment, Isabella gently placed her hand over mine and whispered, "It's a boy." You know, it was just past 2:30 in the morning when I felt this urge to step outside for a walk. The next day was going to be rough. Report cards coming in, and my nerves were tangled up tight. I needed to clear my head. As I strolled, I passed the old church at the corner, and that's when I noticed him. A man waiting patiently at the crosswalk. He was dressed in a business suit, wore this vintage rain hat, and held an open umbrella, even though the sky was perfectly clear. It struck me as odd, but I just kept my gaze low and kept moving. I wanted to be alone, after all. But honestly, my anxiety was only getting worse. Then I reached the playground, lit faintly by distant streetlights. There was someone crawling across the top of the monkey bars, not swinging, but literally crawling like a centipede. Kids, right? Before I turned away, something caught my eye. A closed umbrella resting against the slide. It sent a chill down my spine. I looked down again, picked up my pace. The tension inside me was climbing fast. A little further, I came to a row of houses. I swear I saw a figure crawl under an SUV and not come out the other side. As I hurried past, there it was again, that same umbrella, now propped against the vehicle. My heart started pounding like a drum, and I couldn't take it anymore. I spun around and started sprinting back toward my apartment. After a few hundred yards, I thought I'd lost him. But how was this person always a step ahead of me? When I fumbled for my keys, I noticed a single car parked on the curb. And there, just a silhouette, a man in a rain hat, watching me. Then, just as I pulled open the apartment door, something dropped onto my foot. An umbrella. I slammed the door shut and locked it tight, rushing into my room. I felt the panic bubbling up, like it was about to consume me. My psychiatrist always warned me about this, the panic attacks that could take over if I wasn't careful. And then, just as I was trying to catch my breath, the door across the hall creaked open. It was Liana, my neighbor. "Hey, can you help me? My smoke detector won't stop beeping," she said. You can't imagine what a relief that was. I've always liked her, quietly admired her. I smiled, trying to seem calm, and followed her inside. She was just about to go to bed. I wanted to stay longer, but I'm not that bold. We exchanged numbers and I headed back to my place, my heart lifting a little as I stared at her name saved in my phone. Liana. But then, flipping on the light, it hit me. I'd left my door unlocked the entire time. The anxiety came crashing back harder than ever. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on. And then, in that split second, I saw it. The umbrella leaning casually against my couch. A deep, grumbling voice whispered right in my ear, "It's not your fault. I was always a step ahead of you." The lights flickered out behind me, and I felt something cold and sharp press into my back. I don't know if I should pull it out or just let go. Maybe, in some strange way, I'm better off this way. People always said I was delusional. Maybe they were right. Does anyone have any idea what this could have been? Because honestly, I still don't know what I saw that night. For a little context, I live near this desert mountain range, and I've been walking those trails for years. I usually go at night because during the day it gets brutally hot, almost unsafe if you're out there too long. So I know the sounds out there pretty well. Coyotes, wild pigs, birds, wind moving through brush, rocks shifting, all of it. When you grow up around a place like that, you learn its little noises. That night, I was walking through the desert like I'd done 100 times before. It was calm, and the moon was brighter than usual, which I actually liked because it made the trail easier to see. I hiked up one of the smaller mountains, stood there for a bit looking at the city lights, then decided it was time to head back to my car. The trail I was on is one I know really well. It curves through the mountains and opens up into these wide clearings here and there. There are patches of desert plants, little bushes, cactus, open dirt. I've never understood why that trail has so many clear spots, because hardly anyone hikes out there, but they're there. I got to one of those clearings and suddenly I had that feeling. Like I was being watched. Now, I know that sounds dramatic, but I'm used to that feeling out there. It's nighttime, you're alone in the desert. Of course your brain starts whispering strange little warnings. Still, this felt heavier than usual. I reached for my knife and immediately remembered I'd left it behind. So I picked up a rock, which, looking back, is almost funny. What was I going to do? Challenge the desert to a duel? But in that moment, it felt better than having nothing. I kept walking, and then I heard this humming. At first, I thought it was a car somewhere nearby, or maybe a plane passing overhead. There's a road not too far from that area, so it wasn't impossible. But then the sound changed, or maybe I just finally understood what I was hearing. It wasn't mechanical. It was a voice. You know that little break in someone's voice when they're humming, where it almost turns into singing for a second? That's what it was. Soft, slow, almost like the kind of tune someone might hum to calm a child. I couldn't tell you the melody, and I honestly don't want to try. I just remember how wrong it felt out there. I stopped and looked around. Behind me, near the path I had just come from, I saw what I thought was a tall, thin cactus sticking up from some bushes, but something about it looked off. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it had been there earlier, and I just hadn't noticed. It was dark after all. It was the desert. Missing a cactus wouldn't be weird. Then it moved. It stepped onto the trail. That was when I realized it wasn't a cactus at all. It was tall, too tall, thin in this stretched out way, pale, and it was walking down the same path I had just come from, still humming that same soft tune. I didn't stay to figure it out. I know people always say you shouldn't run in situations like that, but I'm sorry. I was not going to stand there and wait for some 7-foot woman humming in the middle of the desert to get closer to me. I ran. I ran with that stupid rock still in my hand. When I reached one of the bigger clearings, I looked back for half a second, and I swear she was standing there, watching me. Not chasing, not rushing, just standing there. That somehow made it worse. I kept going until I reached the parking lot. There was someone sitting in a car, and I'm sure I looked completely insane, coming out of the darkness, clutching a rock, almost tripping over myself trying to get to my car. I got in and drove out of there as fast as I could. And right before I reached the main road, I looked toward the edge of the desert one last time. I swear I saw that same pale woman standing there, staring at me as I left. So yeah, I don't know what that was. I've had strange experiences out there before, but nothing like this. And please don't ask for pictures or recordings, because in that moment, I was not thinking about proof. I was thinking about getting out of there alive. I'm bringing this up because it's been sitting with me for a long time, and I've never really known what to do with it. I know a bit about discernment of spirits, and when I was younger, I got involved in things I really shouldn't have. So I'll just say this plainly. I know what evil feels like. I don't mean being spooked or letting my imagination run wild. I mean that heavy, wrong feeling that settles on you before your mind has even caught up. And I'm not someone who scares easily. I've worked security. I've walked alone through old, empty buildings at night, through deep woods people claimed were haunted, and I was fine. I don't even believe in ghosts. I've always been a bit solitary by nature, too. Honestly, if life and money made it easier, I'd probably live very quietly somewhere remote. So I'm not the sort of person who gets shaken just because a place is dark or lonely. But a few years ago, I took a short holiday to this tiny old cottage in the English countryside. It was near a small village, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. The drive there was miserable. Flooded lanes, sheets of rain, narrow roads disappearing into hedges. By the time I arrived, the light was already fading. The cottage itself had once been a barn, and apparently, much further back, part of it had been used as a chapel in the medieval period. The layout was strange. A little kitchen, a bathroom downstairs, a sitting room, and then a loft bed above it. It had that old stone stillness about it. I unpacked, brought in my bag of books, and tried to settle myself. I said evening prayers, spent a while in meditation, and then planned to read for the rest of the night. That was when the feeling began. The closest way I can describe it is the atmosphere in a packed stadium just before something violent kicks off. That swelling pressure, that charge in the air. Except this was not excitement. It was wrong. It felt dark, almost hostile. I tried to push through it. I told myself I was tired from the drive, that the rain and the isolation were getting to me. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something terrible would happen. I stayed awake for hours, watching the room, listening to every small creak, until dawn finally came. Only then did I manage to sleep a little. The next day, I tried to shake it off. I went for a walk into the village, thinking some normality would help. It was about 1.5 miles away. I thought I'd get a few supplies, maybe some fish and chips, then walk back and laugh at myself for being dramatic. But the village was empty. Most of the houses seemed to be holiday lets. The post office was closed. The pub was closed. The fish and chip shop was closed. There was no one around, no ordinary hum of life, just quiet streets and shuttered windows. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt abandoned in a way that got under my skin. I walked back to the cottage with nothing, still unsettled. That presence was still there when I returned. I tried to make the best of it. I watched a couple of DVDs on a small portable player since there was no Wi-Fi, no phone signal, and no television. I kept to my usual prayers throughout the day. I told myself I was being foolish, that I'd come all that way and I should at least try to rest. But as evening came down, the same feeling returned. That same pressure. That same dread. I climbed into the loft bed and left the DVD player running downstairs for background noise, hoping it would make the place feel less silent. But the moment I lay down, it got worse. I stayed there for about 3 hours, just lying still, feeling that awful sense of threat. Then I began struggling to breathe. My face started swelling, and that was it. I decided I was leaving. I packed quickly, cleaned up what I could, loaded the car, and got out. It was around 2 a.m. I was exhausted, and looking back, driving probably wasn't wise. But staying felt worse. I drove until I found a small lay-by, pulled over, and slept for maybe half an hour before carrying on home with the window open, cold air blasting in, and music turned up loud just to keep myself steady. Even now, I still get shivers thinking about that place. I don't know what happened there. I don't know whether my prayers stirred something up, or whether there was already something in that building, or whether the land itself carried something heavy. I only know what I felt, and I've never been able to dismiss it. For a long time, I didn't really talk about it. Then I heard a similar account from someone I'll call Gareth, a man with a very similar temperament to mine, solitary and not easily frightened. He spoke about an experience near Ben Alder in Scotland, where he also felt something so oppressive that he fled in the middle of the night. Hearing that made me feel less alone in it. So I suppose I'm asking now because I need to know. Has anyone else experienced something like this? That deep, unmistakable feeling of evil in a place, strong enough to make you leave even when every rational part of you is trying to stay? You know, my wife and I decided to take a trip to New Zealand, and we picked this spot near Lake Taupo to camp for a night. Lake Taupo is this incredible place sitting right in a volcanic caldera, which kind of sets the scene for all sorts of eerie local legends. One of the tour guides warned us about this entity called Natoroa, a name so tricky I still can't say it right after all these years. He told us it was some kind of demon that roams the cliffs at night. He gave us a compass with a mischievous smile, as if to say, "Good luck." We chose the northwest side of the lake, where the cliffs rise sharply and ancient giant faces are carved into the granite, said to keep the volcano calm. It was midwinter there, so the beach was mostly empty, adding to the lonely vibe. Those towering carved faces, about 20 feet tall, seemed to stare right into your soul, really unsettling once night fell. We fell asleep peacefully, but then this blood-curdling screech shattered the silence, coming from all around us, from the woods, from the water, everywhere. My wife whispered, "Is that an owl?" But it wasn't any owl I've heard. The sound just kept getting louder and more frantic. Then the branches behind us started cracking, and voices approached. Flashing my light, I caught sight of 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl, who looked just as scared as we were. They told us they'd been running when something chased them from the woods. Before we could process that, this horrific, high-pitched shriek echoed just yards away, and a mist started rising from the water. Then, breaking the surface, something dark and massive appeared. The teens screamed and took off into the forest. My wife tugged at me to run, but I was frozen, gripping my hunting knife, waiting. Then I shone my light on the figure, expecting a monster, but it was a man in scuba gear. He shouted, "Oi! You folks camping here?" We stammered about being scared, and he explained he was checking the water for mercury toxicity, a nighttime winter routine because fewer people were around. But oddly, as he stepped closer with his flippers, his voice changed, and he asked if we knew about the demon. Before we could answer, he pulled off his mask, and there was no face beneath, just the inside back of his helmet. His voice dropped to a chilling growl. "You don't even know what this is, do you?" We didn't wait around to find out. We ran, jumped in our car, and sped off to a hotel miles away. The next day, back at the tourist office, the same guide looked puzzled when I mentioned the diver. He said, "We don't have divers in the lake because of the sulfur and pressure down there. It just doesn't add up." When I told him about the kids in the chase, his face grew serious. Then he said something that's haunted me ever since. Natoroa can appear as anything it wants. If you heard those shrieks, you were probably on its radar. We packed up our untouched gear and left, never looking back. My wife called the whole thing a prank, but I'm not so sure, especially when I think about the black sludge smeared all over our tent and the rotten egg smell that lingered in the air. Some things, I guess, just can't be explained. I realized something really strange, and honestly, I still don't know what to do with it. Back in May of 2019, I'm almost certain it was Sunday, May 26th. I left the house to clear my head between study sessions. Exams were getting close, and I needed a break. Just a simple walk around the neighborhood. Before I went out, I checked the weather. I remember seeing 31 degrees in the shade. That number stayed with me because the heat felt heavy, almost pressing down on everything. I remember thinking, if it's already this hot in May, summer is going to be brutal. And the thing is, I've always been someone who remembers details, dates, temperatures, little moments, the atmosphere of a day. I remember where I was walking. I remember the way the air felt. I could tell you what school year I was in, roughly what was going on in my life, even the mood I was in. There's no part of me that feels like this is a vague memory. I lived that day. I was there. Then recently, in May 2026, it was around 32 degrees outside, and that old memory came back immediately. It felt almost identical, so I got curious. I wondered whether that day in 2019 had been some kind of early heat record. So I checked the weather archives for my city, and that's where everything started to feel wrong. Every source I found said the temperature on that day had only been around 20 or 21 degrees. Not just slightly cooler, but completely different. Less sun, mild weather, nothing close to the suffocating heat I remember. At first I thought, okay, maybe the weather app was wrong that day. But even then, my body wouldn't have confused a mild spring day with a heat wave. You don't mistake 20 degrees for 31. That's not a small error. That's a different day entirely. I kept digging. I checked the whole month of May, then late April, then the first half of June. Nothing. No day anywhere near 30 degrees. Not even close. So then I started asking myself, am I mixing up the year? But no, that doesn't feel right either. Too many details line up. The exams, the walk, the place I lived, the exact feeling of that period in my life. It all points to that same date. I know people can say memory is unreliable. They'll talk about cognitive bias, false confidence, reconstructed memories, all of that. And I understand those explanations. I really do. But give it a rest for a second and imagine this. Imagine you clearly remember living through a day. You remember what you did, how it felt, what was happening around you. Then years later, you check the records, and the world basically tells you, no, that day didn't happen like that. That is such a strange feeling. It's not just confusing. It makes reality feel a little thin around the edges. I even started searching with AI, trying to find some possible explanation. One idea was that maybe the weather archives had some kind of widespread error. Maybe a source copied incorrect default values and other sites repeated them. I suppose that's possible, even if it sounds unlikely. But then there's the other thought, the stranger one. What if part of my memory belongs to a slightly different version of events? What if another version of me really did live through that hot day, while the version of me sitting here now is somehow in a world where it never happened? I don't usually believe in the multiverse. I tend to think things have causes, consequences, and a logical order. But this experience is strange enough that it has made me loosen my grip on certainty a little. I've always had some interest in paranormal stories and so-called reality glitches. I know plenty of people dismiss them. They say people exaggerate, or make things up, or misunderstand what happened. And sure, sometimes that's true. But I also think some people genuinely experience things that don't fit neatly anywhere. Things that feel incoherent, almost out of place, like a loose thread in the fabric of ordinary life. And when you try to explain it, people often don't trust you. They assume you're confused, dramatic, or looking for attention. But I'm not trying to impress anyone with this. I'm not claiming I have proof of anything. I'm just trying to understand why I remember something so clearly when the records say it shouldn't be true. Maybe there's a simple explanation. Maybe my mind stitched together pieces from different days and turned them into one memory. Maybe there was some local weather anomaly that never made it into the data. Maybe the archives are wrong. Or maybe, just maybe, memory is stranger than we think. Maybe we sometimes carry echoes from paths we didn't take. Maybe some part of us remembers a version of life that branched away somewhere. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm only thinking out loud. And if worlds do shift, when would that even happen? With major decisions? With tiny choices? Every second? Every breath? It's impossible to know. In the end, I don't think this mystery can really be solved. Maybe the healthiest thing is to keep living, love the people close to us, enjoy the present, move forward with our plans, and not let these questions swallow us whole. Still, I can't deny that the feeling stayed with me. That sense that reality flickered for a moment. That somewhere, somehow, another version of me may still remember that impossible hot day in May. Anyway, I won't stretch this out forever. I just wanted to share it and see whether anyone else has ever felt something similar. Take care of yourselves. Hey, I need to tell you about something that's been weighing heavily on my heart. It all started about 4 days ago when my nieces, Emily and Erica, went missing. My sister, Shayla, has been struggling so much through all of this. She's really fragile right now. She's in the ICU at the hospital after my brother-in-law found her in the bathtub with her wrists slit. It's been a nightmare for all of us, especially for him, trying to support her while everything falls apart. Honestly, I think Shayla's going to keep trying like this until those girls are found. Just last night, Shayla called me in a panic, saying the pipes in the walls were rattling and her head felt like a buzzsaw. Less than an hour later, her husband found her barely conscious again. It's been heartbreaking. Emily and Erica, the twins, were last seen walking home from school, taking the trail through the woods like they always do. Our community has been incredible, neighbors taking shifts searching, holding on to hope, but every day, it feels like that hope is slipping away. The first couple of nights, helicopters were constantly overhead, a haunting reminder of what's at stake. Then, something strange happened. Around 2:15 in the morning on the second night, two girls were found wandering the woods, hand in hand. They looked almost like Emily and Erica, but something was off. Their noses were different, and when police asked their names, one said, Ariana and Ariana. One of the girls had her mouth sewn shut with twine, dried blood staining her chin and neck. The other was frantic, screaming, "Don't touch her! You can't let her talk! She'll let it out!" We went with my brother-in-law to the station to identify them. The detective asked, "Are these your daughters?" And my brother-in-law just shook his head, confused, saying, "No, they weren't wearing white dresses, and they had coats on. It's cold out. Plus, their hair isn't that dark." What made it even harder to believe was that Emily and Erica are so chatty, always full of stories. It didn't make sense that one would have her mouth sewn shut, and then act almost joyful about it, as police described. The officers who first found the girls said they felt an intense unease as they approached. The girls have been in custody for 2 days now. Doctors managed to remove the twine, and the girl with the stitched mouth has been asleep since. I visited Shayla in the psych ward today. She was sedated, barely able to speak, but she muttered, "They found them. You should go talk to the girls." She kept rubbing the scars on her wrists and repeated, "The pipes are rattling, and my head is a buzzsaw." Then this afternoon, my brother-in-law called me, asking me to come over urgently, but wouldn't say why. When I got there, I saw a car I didn't recognize in the driveway. Inside, my brother-in-law, Shayla, and both Emily and Erica were sitting on the couch. Erica had stitches along her lips, and Emily was holding her, both crying. Just then, a woman and a police officer came in. The woman said, "Okay, Erica, he's here. What did you want to tell us?" Through her pain and stitches, Erica whispered something I still can't wrap my head around. That Uncle Greg caught them walking home, took them to an old cabin in the woods, and sewed her mouth shut. Then Emily said, "He tied me up and made me watch, then left." I was shaking, overwhelmed. My heart was pounding. And then the officer said, "Greg Reed, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." And suddenly, the other girl screamed, "I told you she'd let it out! I told you!" I'm still trying to process all of this. It's like the woods whispered a terrible secret, and now it's out in the open. I just hope the girls can start healing, and that Shayla can find peace again. You know, there's something about watching raindrops race down a window that really sets the mood. That night, as we hit a small bump in the road, I glanced up front and realized we were almost home. My dad, always steady, was focused on navigating us safely through this fierce storm. I turned to him and asked, "What did you think of the movie, Dad?" He paused for a moment, then said, "It was pretty good, though I wish there had been a few more scares." I agreed, adding, "Yeah, and that ending? Totally predictable. I mean, who didn't see it coming?" We kept chatting about the horror flick as we pulled into the driveway. Finally, we were home. Dad took the keys and switched off the car. The only sound now was the rain drumming on the SUV's roof. Before stepping out, I pulled my hood up to stay dry, then made a quick dash inside. As I hurried through the rain, I noticed the kitchen light was on. Mom must be cooking. Dad opened the front door and went in, and I followed right behind, closing the door softly. I heard Mom doing dishes and Dad looked at me saying, "Son, I'm going to change into something dry. You should too, and maybe check if your mom needs a hand." I nodded, kicked off my wet shoes by the door, and dashed down the hallway. Passing the kitchen, I called out, "Hey Mom, I'll help in a minute." No answer, just the sound of running water and plates clinking in the sink. In my room, I quickly changed into pajamas, hoping to get some rest after we ate. The sound of the shower told me Dad was freshening up. Not paying much attention, I left my room, passed the bathroom, and stepped into the kitchen. "Mom, what's for dinner tonight?" I asked. She kept washing dishes, her back to me, no reply. I rummaged through the fridge and then heard her call out, "Ron, Jesse, are you home?" I chuckled. "Mom, I'm right here. We've been home a while." Suddenly, a scream cut through the kitchen noises. I froze, closed the fridge, and looked toward the sound. "Mom?" I called. No answer, but I could hear gagging near the sink. Cautiously, I moved closer and saw a small speaker connected to her phone playing a recording. It was her voice, strained and screaming for help. I paused it. The sink water was running, but there were no dishes. Standing there, I looked up. My heart stopped. The figure in front of the sink wasn't Mom. Not really. It wore her clothes, but the fit was off. Too tall, too strange. Its face was covered with what looked like my mom's skin, but blood dripped down onto the sink. Thunder boomed outside, pulling my gaze to the window for a split second. When I looked back, the figure's head turned slowly toward me. Those black holes where eyes should be, a twisted smile beneath the skin mask. I was frozen, every detail etched in my mind. Questions flooded me. Why here? Why Mom? Where is she? And Dad? "Jesse!" Dad's voice called from the hallway. Relief rushed through me as I ran toward him, only to find him on the floor, bleeding, crawling toward me. He tried to speak, struggling. "Run, Jesse!" I stepped back but bumped into something. Turning around, it was that thing looming over me, hiding behind Mom's face. Panic rose, but I turned back to Dad, ready to help. "No, stay back," he warned, still crawling. Suddenly, I saw movement in the bathroom. Another figure, dressed all in black, faceless, sitting on the floor, waving at me. Overwhelmed, I blacked out. When I came to, I was in my room, tucked under the covers. "Mom! Dad!" I called, hoping for an answer. The door creaked open, and in the dim light, I saw Dad's silhouette. "Son, are you okay?" he asked, coming closer. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bad dream, I guess. That movie was scarier than I thought," I said. He looked puzzled. "What movie?" I sat up, clicked on my lamp, and began, "You forgot already? The scary movie about..." And then, my eyes caught the faint shadow of that same figure lurking behind Dad's face. So, I want to give a little context first. About 9 years ago, my older half-sister died by suicide. And I don't think there's any softer way to say this. It was the worst day of my life. Nothing else has even come close. After that, everything in my family started to unravel. My parents' marriage had already been strained, but losing her felt like the crack that split the whole thing open. My mom left my dad the following year, and during the divorce, I learned things I hadn't fully understood before. I found out how cruel and abusive my dad had been to her. And then, looking back, I realized he had been that way with all of us too, including me. I think that kind of upbringing changes how your brain reads the world. At least, it did for me. I became deeply suspicious of people. I have a hard time believing kindness is just kindness. A compliment can feel like a trap. A quiet moment can feel like rejection. My mind is always searching for the hidden blade under someone's words. And that brings me to something that happened recently. There's a woman I work with. For a while, I had a crush on her, though that feeling has mostly faded now. But while we were talking more, this thought started creeping in. What if she secretly disliked me? What if she was just pretending to be friendly? What if every small comment had some passive-aggressive meaning underneath it? Once that idea got into my head, I couldn't stop feeding it. I replayed everything she said, every look, every pause, every tiny shift in tone. I kept turning it over and over, trying to find proof that she hated me. And the thing is, I do this with almost everyone. Even when someone is kind. Especially when someone is kind. It's not healthy, but it's one of the only ways I've ever known how to feel safe. Yesterday, I convinced myself that my suspicion was true. I decided that the next time I saw her, I wasn't going to speak to her. I wasn't even going to acknowledge her. If she smiled at me, I was ready to look coldly back. I wanted to make it clear that I didn't trust her, that I didn't see her as a friend, that I wanted nothing from her. And all of that was based on my fear taking a few tiny details and building a whole story out of them. We didn't end up interacting that day, but I had already made up my mind. The next time I saw her, I was going to treat her like she had done something wrong. Then my shift ended. I was hungry, so I grabbed a couple of snacks before leaving. I walked out through the outdoor seating area, and just as I stepped outside, I heard music playing over the speakers. It was I Lived by OneRepublic. And that stopped me completely. That song means something to me because my sister had incredible taste in music. She always knew the good songs before everyone else did. On long car rides, her playlist was the one we listened to. She was the one who got me into bands like Coldplay and OneRepublic. Music was one of the ways she made life feel bigger. I hadn't heard that song in years. I'm not sure I had even thought about it since she died. But there it was, playing at that exact moment. I sat down and just listened. And as the lyrics kept going, something in me cracked open. I suddenly saw what I had been doing. I saw how far my fear had taken me. I saw that I was about to punish someone who might not have done anything to me at all. I had let pain turn into suspicion, and suspicion turn into anger. And I felt ashamed. Not in a crushing way, but in a waking up way. It felt strange, almost impossible to explain. For a moment, it felt like my big sister was speaking to me through that song. Like she was doing what she used to do when she was alive, looking out for me. Only this time, she wasn't protecting me from someone else. She was protecting me from myself. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I know that's possible. But it was so specific, so perfectly timed. That song, after all those years, right when I was about to become someone I don't want to be, and so close to the anniversary of her death, too. I don't know what the odds are, but they feel small. It was strange. Really strange. But also comforting. Because after everything, it's nice to believe that some part of my big sister is still with me. Still nudging me back toward the person I'm trying to become. Still keeping an eye on me, even now. I'm not sharing this because I'm trying to convince anyone that something supernatural happened. That's really not where my mind is with it. I'm trying to understand it. I've spent years looking for possible explanations, similar accounts, research, anything that might give this experience some kind of framework. A long time ago, my husband and I walked into a house that should have felt completely familiar. It was basically the reverse layout of our own home, almost like a mirror version of it. And there were other people who saw us go inside. We were both sober. We hadn't taken anything. Neither of us had any psychiatric history that would explain what happened. We were just two adults entering a place we thought we understood. But once we were inside, the house was wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. Right near the entrance, there was a staircase that shouldn't have been there, turning off to the left. The wood was a pale golden color, almost honey yellow. Along the stairs were brass posts with ropes, the kind you might see in an old theater or museum. Above us was a stained glass ceiling light with butterfly designs in it. The walls had dark wooden paneling, and there were hallways and doors that simply could not have existed in that building. There were even extra staircases, and there were people inside. That's the part that still catches in my throat a little when I say it. It wasn't empty. It wasn't vague. It felt occupied. After we left, my husband, whose name I'll call Martin here, suggested we not talk about the details right away. Instead, he said we should each write down and sketch everything we remembered separately before either of us influenced the other. So we did. And when we compared our notes, they matched in a way I still find difficult to explain. We both described the same staircase placement, the same rope barriers, the same stained glass lamp, the same pale wood and dark wall panels, the same hallways, the same doors, the same general positions of the people inside. Even little architectural details lined up. The only real difference was that we remembered the butterfly colors in the lamp differently. The next day, the house was back to normal. The staircase was gone. The brass posts were gone. The strange hallways, the extra doors, the dark paneling, the people, all of it was gone. The layout matched what we knew the building should have been all along, but the moment that unsettled me most involved the child inside the house. At first, the child seemed ordinary. Nothing about them immediately frightened me. But then something changed. Their whole expression shifted. The smile became very slow, very deliberate, and deeply uncomfortable. Their eyes looked cold somehow, not angry exactly, but empty of anything childlike. The behavior suddenly didn't feel age-appropriate. It felt performed. I remember my body reacting before my mind could explain it. I just knew I wanted out. So I left. Immediately. Martin came with me. What I'm trying to find now are reports or studies that might overlap with this. I'm interested in cases of shared immersive environmental anomalies, or situations where two people independently reported the same highly detailed false environment afterward. I'd like to know whether there's research on shared misperception, altered perception of familiar spaces, immersive false environments, or even what people sometimes call time slip experiences. Again, I'm not asking anyone to tell me it was paranormal. I'm asking how two people could experience the same detailed alternate version of a real place, then independently document matching memories afterward. I'd genuinely be interested in psychological explanations, anomalous case literature, or any framework that might help make sense of it. You know, school halls are usually this buzzing place, right? The bell rings and suddenly the corridors are alive with laughter, chatter, lockers clanging open and shut. But I tend to drift through quietly, kind of on the sidelines. One morning, my buddy Benny, we only really catch up before class. He walks up to me and asks, "Hey Leo, you good?" And I just tell him, same old, you know? Then he's a good guy. He always checks in even if it's just a quick hello before the day starts. As I keep strolling, I overhear the usual school gossip. Apparently, 3 teachers are mysteriously absent today, which is why the halls are filled with substitutes instead. It's a bit odd, but I shrug it off. Then, the bell rings again. Just like that, the noise fades and everyone scatters to their classrooms, leaving the halls silent. I head over to the gym, remembering the announcement about a water balloon fight the gym teachers planned. A little break from the usual routine. The place buzzes with excitement as everyone gathers, waiting to start. A big cart loaded with balloons rolls into the center. But before the teachers can even say go, balloons start flying everywhere. Laughter, shouts, water splashing all over. I watch from the sidelines, wishing I could join in. But then, something strange catches my eye. Not all balloons just have water. Some burst with something else. Something red. At first, I can't believe it, but as the balloons pop, this red liquid splatters over the kids. It's blood. The chaos keeps going, the water mixing with blood as it spreads across the gym floor. Then the teachers blow the whistle, but by then, the kids notice. Screams erupt when a drop of blood falls from above, and then, something horrific. The missing teachers. They're hanging from the ceiling. Control is lost. Kids run out, leaving a trail of terror and blood staining the halls. But me? I don't run. I stay back, watching it all unfold as alarms blare. I step closer to the pool of blood, crouch down, and see my reflection in the wet floor. My hands touch the sticky mixture. It's warm, oddly comforting. I slick my hair back with the red fluid. As the cops and other teachers storm in, they find me right there. One officer asks, "Sir, why are you still here?" I just say, "I'm the janitor." Holding my mop, I glance down at my reflection again, a small smirk tugging at my lips as I start cleaning. Photos are taken, questions thrown my way, but my answers don't add up. They check the security tapes from the night before, but the cameras haven't worked in years. Being a janitor can get dull. Sometimes there just isn't enough mess to keep things interesting. So, I thought, why not create my own chaos? After all, if I make the mess, I get to clean it up too. And that's a game I can play all day. Hey there. I want to share a story that stayed with me for years now. Back in 2009, I was making this long drive from New Orleans all the way to Eugene, Oregon. It was just me, 23 at the time, and my little pit bull, only about a year old, packed into this 14-foot U-Haul truck that held everything I owned. No fancy gadgets, just an old flip phone and a printout of MapQuest directions. Smartphones were just starting to pop up, but I didn't have one, and service was spotty at best, especially through stretches of desert where I didn't get a single bar for miles and miles. One day, I was cruising down this lonely highway in central Texas when I realized I hadn't passed a town or an exit for what felt like forever, and my gas gauge was dangerously low. I started to panic a little, thinking I might run out completely. Just as I was about to lose it, I spotted a tiny town up ahead. It was so small, maybe 6 streets in total, and honestly, I didn't even catch the name. I pulled in, filled up my gas tank, ready to hit the road again. But then came the weird part. I couldn't find my way back to the highway. I drove around that tiny town at least 4 times, growing more frustrated by the minute. I could literally see the highway from the town, but every road I took seemed to lead me away from it. So, feeling stuck, I went back to the gas station to ask for directions. Inside, there was this skinny guy with black hair hanging over his eyes, looking like he hadn't washed it in a while. He wasn't creepy exactly, just kind of rude and distracted, eyes glued to a magazine. When I asked for directions back to the highway, he told me to take a road that would get me there in about 17 miles. I was confused and told him I hadn't driven that far from the highway to get into town, So why would it take so long to get back? He shrugged, barely looked up, and gave me a vague explanation about the road curving around. He acted like I was just an annoyance and waved me off. I left feeling uneasy. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking. I got back into my truck and just started crying, overwhelmed by this gut feeling that something wasn't right with that guy. I knew I couldn't follow his directions. The town had just that one store, so I thought, no way am I knocking on doors here. I decided I'd just keep driving around until I figured it out myself, even if it took all night. Then, out of nowhere, this big, rusty red pickup truck pulled up. Out climbed this huge Texan guy, wearing flannel and work boots, the kind of man who looks like he's spent most of his life outside. Without thinking twice, I jumped out and asked him if he could help me find my way back to the highway. I told him how I was feeling stuck and anxious. He looked genuinely concerned and even cracked a joke that made me laugh, which helped calm me down. He gave me clear directions to take a hairpin turn right after a small concrete tunnel I had already passed several times but hadn't noticed was the key. He said that turn often confused travelers because there were no signs. I asked him how far back the highway was, expecting a long stretch. He laughed and said it was less than a quarter mile and that you could see the highway from the town. Curious, I told him about the directions the gas station guy had given me and asked what was out that way. The Texan, who I'll call Tex, looked at me seriously and asked how I knew about that route. Then he told me that road led away from the interstate and ended in what was basically a junkyard of old cars and trailers owned by a family known locally for trouble, meth, alcohol, you name it. The gas station guy was part of that family. Tex warned me to trust my instincts and be careful out there. I'm so grateful I did. I don't know what that man wanted, but I'm thankful I never had to find out. Sometimes, the kindest angels show up in flannel shirts, scruffy faces, and rusty pickups. Thank you, Tex, for saving me that day. I never caught your real name, but you'll always be Tex to me. And to anyone listening, trust your gut. It's usually right.